The idea to travel the country arose early in my senior year of high school. A teacher suggested I read On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I became so engrossed in the book that I was already planning my trip less than halfway through reading it. Originally, the idea was to take the trip once I'd finished college, but after some sage advice from my dad, I decided to move it up. Do it now. Life has a bad habit of getting in the way as you age. With my folks' support, I took a gap year and headed out the day after graduation. My parents believed I was traveling on a Greyhound. I had other plans, however. I rode the bus only as far as my first stop and got off. From there, I'd see the US the same way my folks had. I was going to hitchhike. Along the way, I had a few strange encounters and more than one near-death experience. What follows is perhaps the worst of them all. On this day, I was traveling through southern Missouri. As night approached, the elderly gentleman that had picked me up some 5 miles prior said he was going to have to let me off. I believed he lived nearby and didn't want me to know where. I was just happy for the ride. I bid him goodbye and he drove away into the setting sun. Probably half an hour passed as I walked along the road shoulder, my cheap headlamp lighting the way before me. This section of road was in the middle of nowhere, thus very little traffic passed me. The sun had long set and the temperature seemed pleasant. I felt well rested and wasn't going out of my way to catch a ride. Nonetheless, an old pickup soon passed me and pulled over about 20 yards ahead. I stopped and watched for a moment just to be sure he was stopping for me. He must have realized this. The driver hung his left arm out of the window and waved me forward. I began jogging toward the truck. I was almost at the bumper when the truck lurched forward a few yards. This is a common joke that drivers play on hitchhikers. I'm sure you've seen it on at least one movie. I tried to be a good sport and laughed it off. Once again, I began quickly approaching the truck, and once again, the truck lurched forward a few yards. This is the part of the game, and I continued to be lighthearted about it despite actually getting very annoyed. This is usually where the joke stopped and the driver let me in. Unfortunately, my new friend didn't follow the rules. This time, the driver let me get up to the passenger's door and looked over at me. Before I could get a word out, he slammed on the gas and screeched away. I was fed up by this point. Without thinking, I made a massive mistake by giving the guy the finger. It's a thing I'd seen a million times growing up, and I'd never seen anything other than a few cross words given in exchange for it. However, for some reason, now that I've grown older, I've come in contact with more and more people who react with outright fury to this gesture, and I just met one. I was standing still as the truck began slipping off into the dark, but as soon as I stuck up my finger, the dark was illuminated by taillights. At first, I thought he was trying to lure me in again, but I soon realized he was making a 3-point turn and coming back. A sick feeling began churning in my gut. I had a collapsible baton that I carried for protection and slipped it from my bag. I thought he may be coming back to start a fight. The strange part was that as he grew closer to me, the truck got faster, and the grill was aimed right at me. I'd estimated it was until he was roughly 20 yards away and closing fast that I turned and ran. For all intents and purposes, I was now running for my life. I tried to shake him by cutting into the field alongside the road, but he followed. Then I cut across to the other side. That side was enclosed by a metal tubular fence I had to quickly climb. To my amazement, he plowed the fence over like it wasn't there. I looped back around and out onto the road. He was now very close. I could feel the heat of his engine on my back. I could also feel my body beginning to wear out. One misstep or stumble and I'd be smashed. Perhaps another 10 seconds later, I noticed a turnoff coming up on my left. When I was close enough, I cut off the pavement and down the road. Up ahead, there was some bushes and a wooded area. I summoned up all the power I had left and pulled away. I reached the trees and dove into a ravine. I switched off my headlamp and crawled down under some fallen trunks. It was the first time since this all began that I felt safe, but still, it wasn't quite over. I laid as still as I could and tried to slow my breathing. I could hear the low rumble of the truck's engine passing just yards away. All of a sudden, the woods lit up like a summer day. Unknown to me, that crazy redneck had a spotlight mounted on his truck. The beam passed by my hiding place more than once. At one point, I was sure he had seen me, but he never did. He gradually got further and further down the road until I felt safe enough to move. Over the course of that night, I crawled deeper into the woods. His light would pass by my hiding place occasionally, but I was now too far away to be seen. Around 4 a.m., I finally heard the engine rev up and the tires screech as he sped away. This time for good. I remained in my last hiding spot until well after dawn. The chase had so worn me out that I fell asleep despite still being terrified. And just after 10 a.m., I quietly and carefully stepped from the trees. The sky wasn't anywhere I could see, but I stayed off the road for the rest of that week. Early that Sunday morning, I got a ride from a family going into Oklahoma for a rodeo. I kept my pursuit to myself, though. I didn't want to lay my problems on some complete strangers, and as we passed into Oklahoma, I let out a big sigh of relief. I'm sure they thought I was crazy, but they were too nice to say anything. That night on the road still haunts my dreams occasionally. My meeting with the family begins a new interesting chapter in my own on-the-road story, but I'll save that for another time. Let's just say I spent a night in the hospital after a run-in with a nasty bull. Until we meet again, friends, stay free and never grow old. After my discharge from the military, I had a lot of trouble adjusting. My wife could tell I was struggling especially hard one morning and suggested I go for a walk in the nearby woods. To her credit, it turned out to be the best thing for me. I had forgotten how peaceful nature could be. I walked aimlessly for a while until I came upon a log and sat down. I'm not sure how long I sat there just taking in all of God's creation. I do know that I didn't want to go back. The only thing awaiting me was screaming children and the overwhelming crush of responsibility. And that's when I came up with an idea. Reluctantly, I returned to the house and pulled my wife into the bathroom so we could talk. We each took a seat and I explained my plan to her. She agreed without hesitation, and that was the second I knew she was too good for me. With her blessing, I gathered my kit together and hoofed it all the way back into the woods. For the next 3 days, I camped and explored almost every inch of those woods. I lived off the land, taking only what I needed. And when I emerged, it was like being reborn. From that point on, nature would be my retreat. Another year passed and I continued my little escapes, as my wife called them. I initially stuck close to home, but I soon began to crave a new environment. This brings us to the focus of my story. Not far from me was a large tract of forest used by motorcycle and ATV riders. I've been curious to check it out, but wanted to wait until traffic decreased with the arrival of colder weather. When the time arrived, I packed up all my kit onto my old Honda quad and began my journey. I stuck to major trails at first. As I became somewhat comfortable with my surroundings, I cut off onto an older, long, unused one. It was about 4 p.m. when I came across this open area near a creek. I made camp and watched the sunset from a chair I'd made with my own 2 hands. The next morning, I was getting water when I noticed an old shack setting off under some trees just on the other side of the creek. I planned to check it out after a quick breakfast. Things got away from me and it was almost lunch before I got around to it. I didn't expect there was much to see, but noticed the windows had been covered with burlap, a sure sign of use. I decided to approach from the back. I picked up the tracks of a large automobile, like an SUV. They were very fresh, probably no more than a day. Upon the front door, I saw that 2 padlocks had been placed there. No more than 30 seconds passed before the sound of a truck echoed down the road. I didn't realize I was running until I had reached the tree line. I was hiding and didn't know why either. I watched as a white Silverado parked in front of the shack. The passengers stayed inside for almost a minute. Then, almost in unison, two men stepped out from the Chevy. Both were armed with carbines and wearing armor. The two men stood guard while a third man stepped from the front passenger seat and unlocked the door. The driver soon joined him after, followed by the two lookouts. This had to have been cartel business, and now I was trapped, stuck between a path to safety and a group of potential heartless killers. I'd always assumed they'd work this side of the border, but now I had proof. An hour passed and still no closer to escape. The two guards were doubtlessly watching from the windows, just waiting for one little move. The SIG on my hip would do little against two men with rifles. If I was found, my family would never know what became of me. There was no way that I could do that to them. I had no other choice but to sit tight and wait. Fortunately, my respite soon came. The group of men exited the building, one carrying two duffel bags. The guards took one last look around, and the Chevy disappeared back down the same road it had arrived on. No sooner did the truck disappear from sight that I bolted from cover back across the creek. I gathered my things and gunned my quad back to civilization. The long ride allowed me time to decide my next course of action. I could act as if nothing had happened or go to the cops. By the time I arrived home, I'd made my choice. I drove my truck directly to the sheriff and told them what I'd seen. I had no proof of any illegal activity per se, but they told me that they'd check it out. My good deed had been done. It was up to the cops now. But no, another 9 months went by and no news had reached me. My curiosity got the best of me and I took the Honda back out to take a look-see. I took a position not far from my old camp and set up, and I'd be shocked by what I saw. The old shack was no longer standing. Not gone completely, but from what I could tell, it had been burned down. I decided to take a closer look. On scene, things were much clearer. Not much remained other than some assorted small pieces of metal and charred furniture. I was happy to see it gone, but a little flame of curiosity still burns inside me regarding exactly how it got that way. What had become of the men I'd seen, and what had they been doing? I suppose I'll never know. I often remember that little shack in the middle of nowhere and wonder how many forgotten places like it exist in this country, and what awful things may be going on inside of them. If I come across any others, I'll be sure to share them here. I'll see you all out on the trail. The image of that day is permanently burned into my mind. It was September 3rd, 2002. Our country was still grieving from the attacks the year prior, and patriotism was at a 2-decade high. I'd just met my wife at a friend's birthday party a month earlier. Everything was looking rosy for me. Work was my only weak point, and when I say weak, I simply mean I was stuck in a rut. Not good, nor bad. A day or two before Halloween, I saw my chance to further myself in the company. There was an amazing opportunity opening up in Mexico City, but if I wanted to take advantage, I had to fly out as soon as possible. After discussing this with my boss, he gave me the okay to pursue it. I immediately purchased a plane ticket for midnight and landed just as the sun rose the next morning. And according to my contacts, the man I was planning to meet wouldn't be available until after 8 a.m. I took advantage of the gap in time by taking a nap. When I woke up, I took a quick shower and climbed into my best suit. I was about to make the most important contact in my life, and looking my best would be of the utmost necessity. As the time approached, I called down to the front desk to get me a taxi. I reached the lobby where a young man showed me to my ride. I was feeling good that morning, and in retrospect, I made a big mistake. Foolishly, I tipped the clerk a $50 bill. His eyes almost blew out of his head. In light of what happened, I'm almost positive he was the person who sold me out. From the hotel, the taxi driver took me to my meeting. We made small talk along the way. He agreed to wait for me. I estimated the meeting wouldn't be more than an hour, and he seemed happy for this. As for the meeting itself, it probably could have gone better, but my goal was ultimately achieved. I returned to the taxi and we began the return trip to the hotel. My mood was somewhat darker and I avoided any conversation. I was in the process of texting my boss when the car stopped abruptly. This caused me to be slammed into the back of the seat. Naturally, I was livid. The curses came fast and loose from my mouth. Just as I regained the seat positioning, I noticed another taxi was parked in front of us. The driver of my car was silent. This didn't stop me from asking what was going on. I now realized that he was well aware of what was happening and may have played his own part in it. If I hadn't been yelling like a madman, I may have noticed the guy standing outside my window a little sooner. I just happened to catch a flash in my peripheral vision. When I looked over, I was met with a gun pointed right at me. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I raised my hands to indicate I was no threat. The guy holding the gun yanked my door open and demanded I give him my money. I quickly complied. While this was happening, a voice in the back of my head was praying he wouldn't notice my watch. It was very special to me. It belonged to my father. He was gifted it by my mother on their 25th anniversary. I received it in his will when he passed in '97. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't wear something so valuable, especially in Mexico, but it had been good luck in the past and I needed it on this trip. All this caused me to hesitate when the gunman started yelling "watch" in broken English. I tried to pretend I didn't understand. He grabbed at my wrist with his empty hand instead. I stupidly yanked my arm away and he drove the pistol into my guts. Everything went into slow motion. I watched in horror as the hammer on the revolver began cocking back. He clearly wasn't messing around. I managed to get the watch off before the gun went off. He let off the trigger, just in time as far as I could tell. He ran back to the other taxi and they tore off down a side street. I was just beginning to see that I had been taken into the middle of nowhere. Not a soul was around and the buildings were barely standing upright. Had I been 10 years younger, I probably would have fought back. The environment in the taxi afterwards was chilling. I could see the driver's eyes darting back and forth in the rearview mirror. He didn't dare speak. He had to know I suspected him. Why hadn't he been robbed also? I now had an important decision to make. Was I going to the police or just returning to the hotel and then going to the airport? I was stuck between two decisions. It's no secret the Mexican police are corrupt. For all I know, even they could be complicit in the robbery. The angry side of me said to confront the hotel clerk. I took a few moments to consider my options and chose to cut my losses and just get out of Mexico. I told the driver to return to the hotel if he wanted to be paid. This wasn't my first rodeo after all. I never carried much cash on my person. What I left behind would be all but impossible to find if a hotel employee went snooping. Upon our return, I ran up to my room and retrieved the taxi money. I paid him without a word and he took off just as silently. It was now time for the clerk to feel my wrath, and he greeted me with a fake smile and asked how things were going. In a calm but aggressive voice, I mentioned the robbery. I had no time for his false sympathy and informed him how his accomplices had gotten away with a mere $30 in cash. There was no way I was going to give him the satisfaction of knowing how badly the loss of my father's watch hurt me. He tried to deny it all, of course, but I wasn't hearing it. Not once did he offer to call the police. I told him that I knew what he'd done, and that I was going to make sure everyone I talked to was aware of what was happening in this hotel. I closed by calling him a low-life scumbag and made my way from my room. It wasn't much, but it was going to have to do. I went back to my room and gathered my things to leave. I paid for the hotel beforehand, and my plane ticket was a round trip. I had no further need of that place and its staff. There were several taxis waiting outside the hotel. I grabbed one and he drove me to the airport, and I had no further problems from then on. I had waited to notify my boss of the robbery until I returned to work. He was horrified, as you'd expect. I also made sure that he knew I was never returning to Mexico again. He could fire me if he wanted, but there was no amount of money that could draw me back there. To his credit, he was cool and understood my reservations. My next call was to the man I'd gone there to meet. I wasn't contacting him for any updates as much as letting him know that I'd be passing off any future dealings to another team member. When he inquired why, I told him about the robbery and stressed that I held him in no way responsible for it. He didn't say much other than he understood, and we ended the call. I must admit I was somewhat shocked when I heard that he had agreed to the deal. Even better, he would be coming to the US in the future as to prevent any further threats to our employees. I can't say for sure, but I kinda think he may have felt guilty, although I made it clear I didn't blame him. We've never talked about it, and that's fine with me. I'd rather forget about it myself. This will be my last time discussing the matter. There was one last call I had to make, and it was the hardest. The sadness in her voice upon hearing of the watch was crystal clear. Mom said she didn't blame me, but I could tell it hurt her soul to hear that. It was the first time I can remember crying since second grade. I've since purchased another date made the same year and had it inscribed with the same words as Dad's. I wear it every year at Christmas, and that's all. Mom loves seeing it, but I'm well aware it will never be a true replacement for the original. Deep in the middle of nowhere, America, in the early hours of March 3rd, 1980, a girl is born. She was the apple of her parents' eyes. From that day on, she could do no wrong. Every birthday was a celebration of her greatness. As she grew into womanhood, she stumbled not once. Her beliefs were always in line with modern thinking, and her opinions were never the wrong ones. If you were to ask them, her folks would put her on par with the angels, as near as to divine and beautiful as humanly possible. This is all BS, of course. The girl was never honest with her elders, not fair to her peers. In school, her grades were average at best. Her awkward fumblings with boys were well known. No one around her age respected or liked her. There were a few she controlled through fear, but in time, even they would break away. The child was nothing like the divine creature her parents viewed her to be. You ask, how do you know all this? Well, you see, I was foolish enough to marry her. I'll refer to her as Alicia from here on. Alicia and I had known one another since middle school. We'd grown up not far apart. Her beauty was a truly breathtaking thing to behold, but it was her only redeeming value. For some strange reason, I was the guy she chose. Over time, I'd come to discover why. Her upbringing had made her an abusive narcissist. This was a major turnoff for most guys on her level. I guess guys on my level were more susceptible to her feminine powers. She knew she had me on the hook from the beginning, but not once did she abuse me the way she did everyone else. I'm not sure I would have broken it off if she had. The relationship had its ups and downs like most do. Every few months we'd get into an argument and break up, only be back together soon after. Anytime society robbed her of something, which was often, I was the one there to prop her up. Maybe at the time I actually believed the world was out to get her. She certainly did. Through every bit of drama, I never considered life without her in it. That's certainly why I followed her to community college, despite being accepted to Stanford. I honestly thought that we'd be moving there after 2 years anyway. Per usual, she barely survived those 2 years. Her grades were terrible, and she had to appeal after flunking out of her first semester. I would do all her homework after that and drill her relentlessly until she passed. She was never really stupid. She'd just been raised to believe everything was hers by right. At the end of that time period, she took a terrible job for her friend's interior design company. When I brought up moving to California, she claimed her job was too important to give up. After a lot of inner conflict, I gave up my dream of Stanford and found a nearby university to attend. 4 years would fly by. I continued on with school while she bounced from one dead-end job to the other. Our first daughter was born along this time. Alicia took a long time to bounce back mentally, but when our second daughter arrived 3 years later, she seemed fine. By then, I was teaching at the high school. A last-minute death in the staff meant I was filling in as a wrestling coach too. This meant I was spending less time at home. Alicia had long since quit working to raise the girls, a situation I had no problem with. Unfortunately, this gave her time to brood. She began accusing me of having an affair. The saddest aspect of all this was the fact that I still loved her just as much as the day we met. I never once thought of other women. The accusations broke my heart. The claims of cheating had been going on for almost 6 months. Strangely, one day they all stopped. 2 days passed until I had a free day to spend with her and the girls. Everything was great all throughout the day. She even cooked me a wonderful dinner. Afterwards, I was so exhausted I let her know that I was turning in early. I expected this would make her mad, but she looked angry. I should have known things weren't right when she tucked me in. She'd never been the type to do that, not even for the kids. It didn't set off any alarms at the time, though, and soon I was sound asleep. At some point, I was awakened by a sharp pain in my chest. I fought to wake up. I also noticed a pounding sensation. I finally got my eyes open and I saw a form on my chest banging on it repeatedly. I was in that state where I wasn't sure if I was dreaming. Waking up was strangely difficult, but I eventually managed to do it. With my eyes wide open now, I could tell that form was Alicia. I couldn't understand what she was doing, but I knew it hurt. I summed up all the power I could and pushed her off. I ran my hand across my chest and felt a wetness. It took a second to realize that she had been stabbing me. That was when I began to panic. She was already attempting to mount me again, but I fought her off. I knew I had to get away. My legs felt like I was running through the mud, and I didn't know why. I did make it to the door before she jumped on my back and renewed her attack. My survival instincts had kicked in now, and I slung her to the floor, but she sprung back at me. I impulsively struck her twice across the chin, which knocked her out cold. I'm still amazed at what I did. It was something I know I couldn't have done in any other circumstance. This gave me a chance to get a phone and call for help. Our oldest had been awakened by all the noise. She noticed the blood all over me and began to cry. I covered it up by saying I'd spilled ketchup on myself, and I'm not sure she bought it, but she did go back to bed when I asked her to. By now, I could hear Alicia trying to escape from the bedroom. I was in no condition to stop her. I now know she had drugged me. I ran into the hall bathroom and locked myself in. Only now did the blood loss begin to affect me. The dispatcher did her best to keep me awake, bless her heart, but within a few minutes, everything went black. When I regained consciousness the following day, the pain was agonizing. My yelling alerted a nurse who came in and adjusted my IV. Not much happened for a few days. I remember short spurts of consciousness, but not much more. On the 4th day, I awoke on my own, still uncomfortable but feeling better. A nurse arrived and let me know which buttons did what. She left and returned a little while later with breakfast. It was the first time in my life I'd ever had grits. I was so hungry I devoured everything. After lunch is when the cops showed up. I certainly wasn't expecting what I'd heard. It turned out that Alicia tried to rush the responding officers with a knife and they shot her. She had survived and was recuperating just down the hall. And on a positive note, my girls were staying with my mom. I thank her to this day for having the presence of mind not to bring them to me. This all happened in 2008 and I wasn't able to fully explain the entire mess to them for a few years. For the sake of brevity, I was released later that week and Alicia was transferred to the county jail a few days later. She soon took a plea and agreed to 15 years. With all that resolved, I tried to focus on my daughters. I've been fortunate enough to have 2 supportive parents who've helped me out a lot. Sacrificing my teaching job was something of a disappointment, but administration gave me a regular 9-to-5 arrangement. My oldest is nearing graduation and her sister isn't far behind. I'm amazed at how well they've handled everything, especially growing up into womanhood without a mother. Alicia reached out to them once or twice, but they refused the invitation. I'm never bad to talk to her around them, even after what she did. The choice had always been left up to them. At the end of the day, I think Alicia is the one who suffered the most from all of this. Listen, I'm not making her a victim. She was 100% responsible for her actions, but I know for a fact being away from her daughters was torture. The wounds she'd received never fully healed. The few times I did speak to her, she made mention of her constant pain. Then, just as she was nearing the end of her sentence, she contracted COVID and passed away. It definitely wasn't an ending anyone deserves. Not even her. The older I become, I'm less and less capable of ignoring my prior bad actions. I recently turned 36. It's no longer possible for me to hide what I took part in or act as if I don't feel an indescribable level of guilt. I'm writing this anonymously to confess my crime in some ways. My fear of prison equals only to the loss of my family. Being separated from them would be a fate worse than death. Had I not become sober, the truth would have probably died with me, and this is going to have to do. Once the story is posted, the account will be abandoned and left to the whims of Reddit. Contacting me will just be a waste of time, and it's better if you simply read this and go about your day. This confession is made for my own sake alone. Nobody needs to act on this information, and you'll garner no benefit in doing so. My troubles likely stem from my childhood. My parents, unlike many of my friends, remain married to this day. Punishment was never unwarranted or excessive, but it was the only real time I was given attention by my father. He merely existed as a financial resource. Even now, we have no real emotional connection. I include this information only to illustrate the feelings of emptiness I've carried for most of my life. On the other hand, I could have been born emotionally stunted from the beginning. I suppose the reasons matter little when you get down to it. To most, they will be nothing more than cowardly excuses, and either way, what I'm about to say is disgusting and should be viewed as such. I know what I did was wrong. The real problems began when I left home for college. Not being particularly smart put me at a considerable disadvantage. My grades were already low before I made friends of the locals, but it didn't take long for me to begin my long slide down. For the sake of anonymity, I'll call these two guys Mike and Kevin. We met at a local dive bar that served us underage. My parents didn't drink, and I've only ever drunk once in my life before college. This gave me a very warped relationship with alcohol. From the start, I drank until I barfed, every time. That's probably why those two liked me so much. I had no off button once I got started, just like them. Soon enough, I was doing drugs with them. I don't mean a little pot either. I dove right into the deep end and barely treaded water for the next 14 years. You can guess what happened. By sophomore year, I was kicked out. I didn't bother to tell my parents. They just kind of guessed after I stopped coming home for holidays. Honestly, I'm actually glad it happened. I'm not left with the crippling debt most of my peers have. But anyhow, I began doing small jobs and selling drugs to get by. Things like coke and X mainly. Partying became the sole focus of my life. My personal drinking and drug use was growing out of control, and this resulted in the story I'm about to share. I'd like to think I wouldn't have done anything like it otherwise. It took place on one of my booze and dope-filled binges. I was with Kevin. I'm not sure where Mike was. I don't guess it matters anyhow. I do recall that we'd been getting high since around lunchtime. It was already way after dark when we got to the bar. Just by chance, we ran into another guy from the neighborhood. He was a few years younger and had that little brother, annoying hanger-on vibe about him. As the night drew on, this kid got drunker and drunker. He became very verbally aggressive with us. I'm not sure if he thought he was being funny or felt tough. It didn't matter. After an hour of this, we'd had enough. When he stumbled off to the can, we started making plans. Not to kill him, but give him a butt-kicking he'd never forget. He returned and we invited him along to get some coke. He was down with it, but we had other plans though. We all piled into my car and drove out to a quiet place we'd been to before. He didn't see it coming from what I could tell. Even as we stood before him preparing to beat him up, he was still asking about the blow. I believe I was the first to hit him. After that, no one was keeping score. In retrospect, a sober me would have stopped far sooner, but neither of us were anything close to it. The beating went on for about 5 minutes. To our credit, I don't think we kicked him in the head. Like I said, it was just to teach him a lesson. When we were done, we flipped him over, and he was still breathing. I remember that specifically. I also recall the rattle sound in his throat as he did. In our drug-addled minds, we thought it was so funny to leave him out in the middle of nowhere. So we leaned his battered body against a tree and left him there. Not once did I think he was dead or close to it. I'd been beaten far worse in the past and partied the next day. Speaking of the next day, the horror of what we'd done hit me hard. I tried to justify it in my mind. When I could no longer do so, I got high to forget. This went on until I was able to ignore it. We weren't sure if the beating would be enough to stop the kid from coming around. We hoped it would, but if it didn't, we hoped he'd at least keep his tongue in check from then on. Drugs were the only reason we'd hung out with him in the first place. When he disappeared, I don't remember anyone missing him or even mentioning him after that. This incident was a mere blip in my downward spiral of alcohol and drug addiction. I was able to put it behind me in a terrifyingly quick amount of time. Several more instances would occur, but none reached the level of depravity that this subject did. Years would pass in a blur. My so-called friends would sell me out the first chance they got. Even then, that night was never mentioned. Although I may sound bitter about what they did, jail would prove to be a godsend. Unable to get high for the first time in years, I was forced to face my problems. All but one. For a long time, I wasn't sure if it even occurred. I know now this was just my brain's way of coping. Now that I've been clean for over 4 years, the truth of that night is becoming more transparent by the days. There hasn't been a night in the last year that I haven't relived it in my dreams. Perhaps nightmares would be a better word. Last night was the final straw. Awaking soaked in sweat and screaming, as my wife called me, was the end of the road. If I didn't at least tell someone what happened, I would soon go mad. And telling my wife isn't possible. I would rather die. She knows some of my past, but I'm sure hearing this would destroy her love for me. That is a sacrifice I would make to no one. You may have noticed I'd never stated whether the victim in question died from that beating. The truth is, I don't know. I've been too afraid to search out any information. Being certain would probably drive me to make an irrevocable choice. A choice that would positively destroy my family. For the time being, I have to hope this confession may alleviate at least some of the crushing disgust and guilt I feel. If it does, what I do doesn't affect you in any way. Therefore, the reader's part ends here. Whether or not you think about this matter the seconds after you click away, for the good of yourself and those you love around you, think twice before you step onto the path of drugs and alcohol. My wife should serve as an example to you. I once considered myself a kind and decent person. I'm sure you can see that drug use has stripped that from me. If you don't care about yourself, remember, there are others who do. This story takes place in the late 90s. At this time, I was living in the upper Midwest, a state near the Canadian border to be more specific. Ever since I can remember, I've had a deep love of hunting. The actual act of taking an animal's life was not something I enjoyed, but the thrill of the pursuit, not to mention the tranquility of nature, was a thing unparalleled. Either it's something you understand or you don't. I can't describe it any better. While unfortunately, health problems and age have limited my ability to take to the woods as I used to, during this time I never passed up a chance. Deer was my main prey. However, on more than one occasion, I accompanied some friends out west to hunt elk and moose. These trips always required more walking than I preferred, so after the 3rd year, I decided to bail out and focused on my beloved whitetails. The reason I mention so much about hunting is because the incident I witnessed occurred on one of my many hunting trips. At no point during that day was there any hint at what I was about to experience. I set out just before dawn and sat at the base of my favorite tree. It was surrounded by bushes on 3 sides, thus creating the perfect hide. I remained there until just after 9 a.m., at which time I decided to do a little tracking. I did eventually come across some sign, but determined it was too old to do me any good. I continued nonetheless and ran into a small lake I'd never seen before. The area I had stumbled into had been closed to hunting until just recently. Being the first man to hunt this land in God knows how long made this trip worth it regardless of whether I bagged a buck or not. The day this occurred just happened to be unseasonably warm. Happening upon the lake seemed like a divine gift, at least at first. Midday was generally accepted as a bad time to hunt. I figured I'd do just as the deer usually did and bed down for a while. I unloaded the round from the chamber and set my rifle against a large oak and approached the lake. I pulled my handkerchief from my vest pocket and squatted down to dip it in the hoped-for cool water. Now fully soaked, I raised it to my forehead and squeezed it. The water ran down my face and I instantly felt relieved. And there was another thing I noticed though, a strange smell emitted from the liquid. I paused and just assumed it was the sweaty bandana and continued cooling myself. While it was there, I figured I'd go ahead and top off my canteen. Just as I lowered it to fill, I caught sight of something alarming. Less than a foot below the surface, the face of a dead deer stared back at me. This explained the smell. No woodsman worth his salt would drink water containing a corpse. It would be a guaranteed trip to the hospital and a long, miserable battle with his innards. I was greatly disappointed to encounter such a stomach-turning scene in such a beautiful setting. My first instinct was to wash my hands and face with soap and some fresh water from the canteen, which I quickly did. As for the hanky, I dug a small hole and buried it. Certainly not a necessary measure, but I didn't want to take any chances. Now I was curious. I decided to walk around a little and examine the lake a tad closer. What I found was of great concern and more than a bit bewildering. With each step I took, I would see part of or all of a dead animal in the water. Just about every member of the animal kingdom currently inhabiting the U.S., and a few I couldn't identify, and they were rotting in that lake. More than a few beautiful large bucks lay just under the surface. One had such a large, luxurious rack it reached a good foot out of the water, and never before had I seen such a sight of carnage in my life. Briefly, I assumed they had been shot by poachers and disposed of, but at least the animals I could see clearly had no visible injuries. The longer I stayed there, the creepier my surroundings became. I could probably chalk that up to my mind getting to me, but it made no difference. I had to get away from that lake right then before I ended up taking a permanent nap alongside my fellow animal cousins. There was one thing I had to do first, though. I returned to my pack and dug through it until I came across a small glass vial I kept among my small accessories. As carefully as possible, I lowered it into the water and filled it. I closed it as tightly as possible and sealed it into an empty sandwich bag. Once again, I made sure to wash my hands well. I had a friend who was a well-respected professor at a nearby university, and my plan was to get him to test it, more for my curiosity than anything else. After my trip ended, I did just that. I gave him a brief description of what I'd seen and left him the sample. He promised to get it back to me when he could. Not once did he show concern. As usual, I returned to work, and time flew by. I wasn't able to get back to my buddy for another month or two, and on a quiet Saturday morning, I rang him up. I could tell he sounded a bit nervous. Initially, he tried to tell me that the sample was normal. It didn't seem right, but he was the pro, not me. I continued to describe how strange the scene had been. Small talk, mainly, and soon he was trying to convince me to forget about it. The urgency in his voice bothered me greatly, but I did let it go. Perhaps there was something he wasn't prepared to say over the phone and some secret sciencey stuff, I don't know. I wasn't sure. The call soon ended, and I put that question on the back burner for the time being. Months had passed by, and I began to focus on more family-related things. Christmas was quickly approaching, and the family and me had lots of shopping to do. On one of these occasions, I caught sight of my old friend. I hadn't intended to grill him about anything in particular that morning. The two of us were less than 20 yards apart, and I called out to him. He visibly turned and made eye contact before turning just as quickly and hurrying away. I must admit I was a bit taken aback in the moment. We'd known one another for over 30 years, and he'd never avoided talking to me before. In fact, he was usually the fella to instigate a discussion. Despite being somewhat hurt about it, there wasn't much I could do. Another old friend had passed from my life. All well, so is the plight of man. That year quickly ran its course, along with another. 3 years passed until I was able to get back to that part of the woods. This morning would go much differently. As I broke through the trees, I believed myself to be lost. Surely I had to be lost. The surroundings had greatly changed in the years since. The massive pond or lake, whichever you chose to call it, was gone. There was small signs of the area past, but had you not known it, you wouldn't have picked them up. I did double-check my map to be certain of my location. My time in the army had transformed me from a middling to darn good navigator. The map I held in my hand even showed the once existing lake, there was no doubt. That stinky, horrid pool of death had disappeared. I can't say I was sad to see it go. Nonetheless, its disappearance was just as strange as its existence, perhaps even more so. From then on, I would follow a destructive path, one that only served to alienate and harm those close to me. In the many years since that whole nonsensical event took place, I still struggle with what I had encountered that morning. While a body of water being a source of death to those creatures around it is not unheard of, the events that unfolded in the months and years following are really confusing and agonizing to me. My friend and I may not have been as close as we once were, and perhaps forces in his life beyond his control drove us apart. But when a large body of water disappears into thin air with no reasonable explanation, that's a jump in reality I'm just not prepared to take. I'm not an excavator or engineer. Heck, I'm not even much of a gardener, but I do know one thing. It takes a lot of organization and equipment to fill in a natural lake in the middle of nowhere. It takes even more talent to make it look like it never happened. Somebody, somewhere, wanted that cursed body of water to be gone and forgotten. Their identity will more than likely never be known to anyone outside their group, nor do I think of this little puzzle of mine matters much in the overall scheme of things. Nonetheless, I couldn't allow it to slip away unnoted into the depths of history. Now that I'm a sick old man with no one left to tell my story, I'm putting pen to paper. Included with my account is the original map showing the location of the Phantom Lake. To whatever poor soul discovers this envelope, I beg you don't repeat the same mistakes I made. You may be the new keeper of this information, but it doesn't mean you must share it. I advise you to keep your mouth shut and play nice. I regret that I didn't. You may be left in peace if you do. Ultimately, what you choose to do with this story is solely up to you. Regardless of your choice, I wish you luck and may God protect you and the lives of all you hold dear. What follows happened to me in the summer of 2015. To the average listener, this tale will sound ridiculous and implausible. I assure you every bit of it is based in fact, and I was the individual who experienced it. I pray you'll be able to suspend your cynicism and take my story to heart. At the center of it lies a terrible truth, and paying attention to it may prevent others from going through what I did. Those of you who remain, I thank you for your time and ask you share my story with anyone you believe may benefit from it. We start after college graduation in 2014. I found employment as a legal assistant in a southwestern state. All had gone smoothly for the first year, and there was no indication I was in any danger going forward. One quiet July evening, I was leaving the office after working late. This was not uncommon when the firm was working large-scale cases such as class action suits. I was on my way to my car when a van drove up alongside me. Two men wearing ski masks jumped out and held me while one put a fabric bag on my head. My hands were then zip-tied behind my back and I was hurled into the van. The entire incident couldn't have lasted more than 30 seconds. No one spoke as the van sped away, not even me. I was too terrified and didn't dare ask what was happening, Ignorance seemed preferable to certainty, if you get my drift. Several minutes passed until my captors began to talk among themselves. Unfortunately, they were speaking Spanish, a language I knew very little of at this point. This is when I began to try and bargain for my life. I'm almost completely resigned myself to the fact that I'd be violated, but dying wasn't something I wanted. I wasn't sure if they'd understand me, but I was sure going to try. Slowly and clearly as possible, I expressed my desire to live and reminded them that I could not identify them. Once they were done doing what they wanted, they could let me go without fear of being arrested. And just to be thorough, I added that I couldn't understand their language. This was when the van stopped moving. I heard the doors open and close. It appeared I was now alone while my captors discussed my fate outside. However, the longer I sat and listened, I could hear the breathing of another person. I began to call out to them, "Hello, hello." I repeated this 5 times before a voice told me to shut up. This person had to have been a native English speaker. He had no accent, but then again, that could just be my American prejudices showing through. I don't know for sure. Maybe 10 minutes passed and I heard the doors open again. I assumed that they were about to do their business. As the seconds ticked by, my heart pounded harder and harder. I started to consider my position. If I wanted to survive, I was going to need to stay as calm as possible, no matter how horrible things became. Then again, maybe I won't want to live when it's all over. I suppose it was possible, but at that moment in time, all I wanted to do was see my parents again. One of my captors began pulling at my blouse. "Okay, it's starting. You can do this. Just pretend you're somewhere else." My breathing started to quicken. I repeated these thoughts in my mind despite the dread that I felt. The way he was undressing me was confusing. I couldn't understand why he was lifting my sleeve. When I felt the poke of the needle, I realized what he had been doing. All my self-control went out the window and I began screaming and thrashing. I was going to go out fighting. It took less than a few seconds before everything went black. Waking up was a very disconcerting experience. I must admit I was a bit disappointed with the afterlife in which I found myself. Not only did I feel like a truck had hit me, my surroundings looked exactly like the state that I'd been killed in. My hands had been unbound and the bag removed, and it soon became obvious I had not been murdered. Rather, I must have been put under and then dumped. There didn't appear to be any signs of assault either, which posed a big question. Why abduct me in the first place? Don't misconstrue my words. I was overjoyed not having been ravaged, but my captor's intentions were just confusing. What was I missing? After a brief self-assessment, finding my way home seemed wise, so, as they say, I was just some Yankee in the desert, basically the middle of nowhere. Luckily for me, I stumbled upon a road and got picked up before dark. My ride left me at the nearest police station, and I recounted all I remembered to the detectives. With a new lease for life, I did my darndest to carry on as if the whole mess never happened. It took me some time before the realities really hit me. I was able to fake it at first, but I found myself breaking out into sobbing fits at work for what I thought was no reason. In my mind, nothing bad had happened to me, so I shouldn't have PTSD. I turned out to be wrong. Only after attending counseling for several years have I come to see just how damaging the abduction had been to me mentally. I'm determined not to let my fears beat me. So far, I'm getting by. Only time will determine if I'm able to fully heal, so perhaps you guys could pray for me. I'm sure you're all wondering what became of my kidnappers, and the truth is rather disappointing, I'm afraid. Out of the estimated 4 to 5 men present at the time, only one man had been identified, and not even he is a certainty. The police were always just a step behind him. Any hopes were dashed when his body was discovered dismembered in the desert, and I've heard no other names mentioned, so I'm not optimistic. As for the reason, there seems to be a bit more to chew on. Just a few weeks after my kidnapping, a girl was abducted from her work across town. She was the daughter of a Mexican official. Unfortunately, she was never released. This incident led the cops to believe I was grabbed by mistake. Something as simple as a confusion over the north and south ends of a street almost cost me my life. I ask that you keep the family of that poor girl in your thoughts this year as you join together to give thanks. Never let someone tell you small mistakes can't add up to something large and life-changing. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, why did the coffee file a police report? It got mugged.
Hey everyone, just as a quick reminder for those of you who may not have heard, I have joined the Chilling family, where I'll be providing hours of spine-tingling content and narrations exclusively on the app, and I want to make sure you take advantage of the free trial if you haven't yet. Chilling is the new home of horror and an amazing mobile app that allows you to do things that are just not possible on YouTube, with hundreds of unique and amazing stories that are sorted into curated playlists, or you can create your own. We give you so much flexibility to listen the way you want. This includes a Chilling exclusive feature, our ambient menu. Change the background noise of the story at will to fit your mood. From rainstorms to crackling fires, it's an absolute game changer. Of course, this is offered completely and totally ad-free. That's right, no ads, just hours and hours of uninterrupted, horrifying, creepy, and all-around spooky content. And we're just getting started. Not only are we adding hours of new content every week, but we're soon going to expand into classic novels and audio series. Original video content is also in the works, and we feel we're really building something special here. I couldn't be more excited to have the opportunity to be a part of this journey, and I hope you can join us. Download Chilling now and start your free trial today. Then keep the scares rolling with hours of continually expanded and exclusive content at your fingertips, ad-free, for $2.99 a month. Click the link in the description below or simply search Chilling in the App Store. I work in food service, front of house, so in the early days of the pandemic with restaurants closed, I was taking work wherever I could find it. An old friend clued me into a medical office that needed someone to come in and do a bit of light filing. I was able to go in at night to limit direct contact with people, so I jumped at the opportunity right away. Ironically, the medical office job had been the safest gig I'd been offered thus far, COVID-wise. I wanted to avoid the bus if I could due to crowds, so I decided to swing for a rideshare app. It's not all that expensive in my area, and I really didn't want a virus. I headed in at almost 3 a.m. because it was after the cleaning crew had left. I was kicking myself for being so cautious though because I was exhausted. I stumbled onto the block looking for my ride, and to my tired self's great relief, the car spotted me almost immediately and pulled up asking, "Uber?" While I cluelessly wandered up and down the street searching. The ride was taking a while, but I'd only just moved here last year, so I'm not familiar with all of the surrounding areas and thought nothing of it. I was pretty alert at first, so I was trying to pass the time playing games on my phone and stuff. But the car didn't have a compatible phone charger, and I wasn't sure the building would have one, so I wanted to save my battery to be able to call a ride back. I shut my phone down into airplane mode and eventually drifted off from a combination of tiredness and boredom. I don't often take rideshare, so being alone with a strange driver often put me on a bit of edge, but this guy had a pretty boring car and a very standard look about him. He looked a little like my brother even. Young, clean-kempt, listening to jazz. Nothing that screamed, "You need to micromanage this trip." When we arrived, the driver tried to wake me up by calling me from the front, but I was in too deep of a sleep and couldn't fully distinguish it from a dream. Finally, he awkwardly jimmied my leg to wake me up and kept saying, Ma'am, we're here now." I was so embarrassed that I'd been that out of it, so I just gave a hurried thanks and booked it out of the car and into the building. As I looked around, I began to realize nothing was what I had expected of an office park. I had seen a street view of the building when I first looked up the business, and it appeared to be a strip mall plaza. The further I went, the more loudly alarm bells were ringing in my gut. The structure was semi-dilapidated, and it was pitch dark past the entryway. I expected some lights to be off in the nighttime, but not to the whole building. I skidded across the concrete foundation comprising what was left of the lobby area, told myself they must just be renovating, and followed signs for the stairs. After what felt like ages but what was likely just a few minutes, all I had passed was construction equipment, a couple locked doors, and some smashed windows. I was certain I was not going to find a medical office and figured maybe I had mixed up the address. I took out my phone to double check, but once I got it out of airplane mode, I could barely get a signal. I kept moving around the building, pacing, looking for a stronger signal. I eventually confirmed in my text that I had written down the correct address just by scrolling back, which didn't require service. Since I had only been inside for a few minutes at most, I figured I should try and get in touch with the driver, because if I entered the correct address, then it was only fair he should continue my ride to the correct place and save me the added fees of calling a second trip, considering this was all his mix-up. The app was taking forever to load with my slow service, but before I could get to a cloud of reception, I heard a rustling sound in the lower level of the building. It was on the top floor, and the only stairwell I was aware of was the one I had taken up. So, this would force me into the middle of the building. There was no way to exit the situation without encountering whoever was downstairs. In an abandoned building in the late hours of the night, I figured the chances were high that it was a tweaker, and I had no desire to try slipping past a tweaker, especially when it was late enough that they were probably on something, jumpy and on edge. I tried to get a text out to a group of friends with my address and a request to call 911 to help get me from the property, because I didn't feel safe walking in that neighborhood at night and didn't have enough reception to call a new ride. But the message wasn't sending. Reception was too weak. So I gave up on getting my phone going and started checking for another stairwell, or even window with balconies or dumpsters that could be used to exit the second floor at a last resort, in the event whoever was downstairs came upstairs. I scrambled over to a door with a stairs sign on it, but the stairs were completely dilapidated and it was essentially just a straight drop down to the first floor. At that point, the worst-case scenario began to unfold. I heard whoever was downstairs begin making their way up the stairs. I thought fast and figured based on my walk about the floor was basically a giant loop, so I would have to wait for whoever this was to come up the stairs, wait for them to come all the way up, and then sprint the opposite direction of wherever they were going to try to get down the stairs and out of the building in time to make it to the road without encountering them. I was not anticipating being chased or anything, but didn't want to anger a druggie or have a homeless person who might be living there feel as though I'd trespass and become hostile towards me, or have any sort of interaction that could possibly occur at that hour in an abandoned industrial park. I held my breath for what felt like 5 minutes, but was likely closer to just 30 seconds, and the person appeared at the top of the stairs. To my great relief, it was just the Uber driver. I figured he had come back for me, realizing he had left me in the wrong spot, a place that could have worked out to be dangerous. So I came out from the beam I was hidden behind and started to wave him down. But then I processed. There was no way for him to realize this had been the wrong address. My stomach lurched forward and my blood chilled to slush. I made eye contact with him very briefly, and he was completely calm and composed, but breathing pretty heavily and blocking the stairwell down. On a normal, rational day, as an outside observer, I could think of a dozen innocent reasons he might have returned, but in the moment, standing across from him, I just knew in my gut that this was someone with ill intent. I can't remember much from the ensuing few minutes. Operating solely on muscle memory and instinct, I Superman dove from the second stairwell's opening and just let myself fall down the drop. Thankfully, I don't think he'd seen where I'd gone at first, and thought that I was in too much pain to know it then. Plenty was bruised, but nothing was completely broken. I scrambled up and threw myself at anything that seemed like it could be the door. It was too dark to tell. I was disoriented from the fall, and I wasn't in a calm enough mindset to think to use my phone's flashlight. Plus, in hindsight, some part of me probably knew it would call too much attention to my location. Just before I was able to reach the door, it flew open with a blinding light beaming straight into my eyes. My first thought, though not totally coherent, was, there's another one of these guys. And I stumbled backwards, trying to find something to hide behind. Before I could, a voice called out, "All right, this is the police department. Everyone on your knees and get your hands in the air." I didn't believe it was the police at first. I was in such a fight or flight mode and had already committed to flight that I continued looking for ways to get out. But he kept shining the flashlight right at me as I teetered around and yelled, "Hey, I said on the ground right now. Hands out. Hands out where I can see them." He sounded so authoritative that I just automatically did exactly as he asked. He approached me and finally shined the light away from me. It took a second to get my night vision, but once I did, I could see he really was a police officer. I tried to explain what was happening, but first he started asking me all these questions, and that, combined with what had just happened, and my fear of the driver coming back, all snowballed into my being unable to form a single articulate sentence. He was even asking easy questions too, like, "Can you tell me your name? Do you have any knives, needles, or anything that you could poke or cut me? Would you rather talk here or outside?" My total stunned babbling in response at first led him to believe that I was on something. He directed me out to his car, and once I was safely out of the building, I was able to start getting my bearings just a little. I sat on the edge of the back seat of the squad car with the door open facing out, while he stood across from me and asked the same questions again. The first thing I could think to ask was, "Did my friends call you? What did they tell you?" And he explained no, nobody called him, and he was patrolling the area and noticed a car idling outside of this building that's known to be condemned, and nobody's supposed to be inside. And as he put it, when they are, they're usually up to no good. He was launching into a speech about how I'd gone to shoot up or meet a John, that he had resources he could direct me to, and this was not an ideal place to do either of those things, and asking if I had somewhere safe to stay the night. But I was stuck on something else he'd said. Finally, it all clicked. The car. I spilled my whole rideshare story in a frantic word vomit. He looked around and the car wasn't there anymore. The officer guessed the guy had driven off while we were talking inside the building. He asked me all the details I remembered, and I told him, but there weren't many. I'd been too tired when the ride started to track much, but the officer realized I could pull up my Uber app and get all the information. There wasn't really enough reception there, even outdoors, so we sped down the road, and once I had enough bars, the app roared to life, and I had 4 missed notifications from Uber. They said, "Hello, I've arrived, and I don't see you. Can you confirm the pickup address is correct? And I'm flashing my hazards, and finally, unfortunately your driver had to cancel." At first I thought the driver was so cunning as to pick me up while sending these fake messages and canceling so the GPS wouldn't track us, knowing I wouldn't notice because I was asleep with my phone off, and exonerating himself. But instead I checked the car details, checked again, and it was definitely not the same driver. The person who'd driven me there had not been my Uber. The driver was somewhere else on the street when this guy pulled up to me. The policeman took my statement and said that they would keep an eye out for the guy, but the best I could give them to go off of was basically a young-looking Caucasian male with brown hair, sideburns, goatee, and 4-door sedan, wearing a zip-up sweatshirt, maybe had a hood, which is like 1 out of every 4 guys in the city. I feel so blessed to have survived this near miss. Suffice it to say, I do not take rideshare services anymore. Quadruple check your license plate and driver name. You just truly never know. It all started with a normal day at work. I worked at a small grocery store at the time, and my duties consisted of gathering shopping carts in the parking lot and bagging groceries. Normal minimum wage stuff. It was rainy that morning, and of course I was assigned to carts all day. About 2 hours into my shift, I saw a man rushing to get his groceries into the car. It was pouring. I ran over to him and started helping him with his bag. "Oh, it's pouring," I said. "Mind if I help you get out of the rain?" "Yes, thank you so much." As he was closing his trunk, he looked at me with a very surprised look on his face. He lowered his eyebrows, looked me up and down, and smirked. "Are you a new hire?" "No, I've been here a couple of months." "Oh, you're very pretty," he said in a very sensual tone. "Thank you. Have a good day." I shut it down. I was not interested. And as I was walking back to the store to hide until he left, I could feel him watching me while I walked away. Nevertheless, I continued to work, not really thinking about it. After my lunch, I was at the register bagging groceries, and I noticed that same man from earlier walk in. I pretended I didn't see him and just kept bagging. He came up to the register and got a single chocolate bar. I didn't give him a bag. He stands towering over me and says, "Aren't you going to bag my item?" "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you wanted a bag for one thing." I put his chocolate bar in a bag and told him to have a good day. "When are you off work, sweetheart?" Man, I'm not comfortable giving that information out." He returned with, "That's okay. You've been here what, 5 hours? You probably get off around 6 or 7, right?" He smiled, winked at me, and walked away. Disgusted, I went to my manager and told her what happened. She told me not to work that lot anymore and to ask someone to walk me to my car. So by the end of my shift, I made a male coworker walk me to my truck, and we scanned the parking lot, looking for this man's car. I didn't see him, so my coworker went back inside and I started my truck. I called my mom to tell her about what happened, and once she answered, I left the parking lot. Literally the second I turned onto the road, I saw his car pull onto the road behind me. I told my mom I thought he was going to follow me, and she just told me to drive around a bit to try and lose him. I drove around for about 20 minutes, just going in circles around my town. I hit a red light and he pulled up next to me and started yelling something to me out his open window. I, of course, pretended he wasn't there, but I could still hear what he was saying. "You would bear some good kids for me. You'd make a great slave for me, little lady." He then started being very explicit about what he was going to do to me if he caught me. I told my mom I was going to call 911, and if I wasn't home in an hour, then call the police. While I was trying to dial 911, the man speeds ahead of my truck and starts brake checking me. Frantic, I wait for the closest intersection and turn up the block. My phone fell under my seat while I was turning, so I decided to go to the nearest open establishment and run in and hide and have someone else call 911. The closest open business I could find was a convenience store at a gas station. I pull in, park, and run for my life into the store. I tell the clerk what's happening, and she takes me to the break room and locks me in there. While processing that I might have survived this ordeal, I hear the doors of the storefront start violently rattling, and before I knew it, the clerk was locking herself in the break room too. She was on the phone with the police and they were on their way. We were silent, cowering in a dark room, and I found myself feeling guilty for wrapping another woman into our worst fear. My thoughts were racing through what I had said to him. Did I lead him on? No, I just told him to have a good day. Has he been following me for longer than tonight? How did he know what car I drive? Are the police going to get here in time? Are we going to die? Finally, the small room is illuminated with red and blue lights from the crack under the door. We hear a voice over the intercom tell us it's safe to come out. Shaking, the clerk takes out her keys and opens the door. We walk out and give our statements. After the police leave, I turn to my unexpected savior and profusely thank her. We cry, hug, and she walks me to my car. The next night I went back and brought her some food and an Amazon gift card. I've been in a near-fatal car accident, 10 feet away from a mountain line in the wild, and I am a survivor of assault. I can tell you, reader, with total honesty, I thought that was the end of my line. When I was about 9 years old, female, my family used to live in a remote area on the outskirts of town. Considering the location of the suburb, that area was surrounded by warehouses and such. At the time, my family did not have a phone in the house, and neither did our neighbors. There were no cell phones back then, or they were a luxury and not everyone could afford one. This took place in the end of the 90s. So if I needed to call my mom while she was at work, I had to either go to my dad's work or a company next to his, which was closer, to make a phone call. My dad's work was a relatively short walk from our house, probably about 30 minutes or less. My dad was working at a huge unloading dock for metallurgical and natural resources shipments. In order to get to my dad's work, I had to walk past another adjacent company just like the one where my dad was working. I will call that Docks 2. My dad's work, as well as Docks 2, had a sort of watchtower. It is just a cabin mounted at the top of a tall platform, and you need to go up a decent amount of stairs to get to the top. There was always a guard inside overseeing the whole yard from the top, during the day and night, to make sure no one is in danger and there's no break-ins. The phones were located only on-site watchtowers at the time. Docks 2 were much closer to our house, about a 10 minutes walk. Now one day, as I've done many times before, I went to the Docks 2 to make a call. I climbed the stairs, knocked on the door, and was welcomed in by a guard I used to see quite often and knew well. However, that day he wasn't alone. There was a new guy, 28 at the time, and he was there. Apparently he was a new employee hired to work shifts. He was this very tanned white guy, always wearing military-style outfits. I was just an average-looking child, exactly my age. My hair was very blonde, which made my cheeks always appear rosy red and give me even more childish appearance. When the new guy saw me that day, he wouldn't take his eyes off me. As soon as I was about to finish my call with my mom, it's just one room so everyone can hear my conversation with her, the new guy went outside to smoke. When I came out, he smiled at me and asked me what my name is and whether I came there often to make calls. I don't remember what I said, but I felt very shy because he was just staring deeply into my eyes. I'll just call him the creep. Fast forward, and I came to that tower again to make a call. And there he was again, but that time he was alone. I spoke to my mom, and as I was about to leave, he asked if I wanted any tea, to which I refused. He then proceeded to ask how my school was going and things like that. He offered to help me with my homework. However, I told him I've got it all sorted. Harmless, but strange to say the least. On a side note, I just wanted to say that what gave me shivers when I was near him is that whenever he looked at me, he looked drunk, which was very unsettling. Mind you, he wasn't actually drunk, but his eyes would get so hazy and his face would flush red. Sometime later, I saw him again. That time I was walking to my dad's work with my friend, and he was doing some digging in the Docks 2. When he saw me through the metal fence that was separating us, he just leaned against his shovel and just stared at me. He didn't say hi or anything like that. After those encounters, for quite some time, I took alternative routes to see my dad or play with puppies at my dad's work or make calls to my mom, because he really creeped me out. However, one day I had to call my mom urgently. My dad's work phone didn't work, so I had to go to the Docks 2 tower, hoping I won't see him. The creep was there. And oh boy, he was so happy I came. He was complaining how I don't come anymore to see him. And as I was making the call, he grabbed another chair and sat right next to me very close. It took a while for the call because my mom was busy with something and someone went to get her whilst I was on the line. It felt like hours waiting, and the creep was just sitting next to me, looking at me and still smiling. When the mom finally got to the phone, he got up and went to make some tea and brought some biscuits. When I was done talking, he insisted I have some tea with him. I didn't, and he just kept on trying to strike a conversation. But this time, The tone of the conversation was different. He asked me how old exactly I was, and I told him 12 or 13. I have no idea why I lied that I was older than I was, since I was 9. He told me his age, and although I knew he was much older, I felt really weirded out that he wanted to talk to me so badly or had any interest in being my friend. My alarms did go off every time I was around him, but I guess I didn't really feel overly in danger. He then proceeded to tell me that I was beautiful and asked me whether I had a boyfriend. He asked me if I've already dated boys and what type of boys I liked. I was so uncomfortable and so eager to leave at that point, but he would just keep dragging me into those weird conversations. I could tell he was drinking that day. When I began moving towards the door, he followed me. Eventually, we were both outside, however. In order to get down from the tower, you need to walk this narrow path towards the stairs. He stood blocking it so I couldn't leave. He got very close to me and I freaked out. The only escape tactic I could come up with as a child was to pretend that I'm seeing someone from the top of the tower. So I began waving my hand at the road down the bottom and towards houses in the distance, pretending I see someone I know and saying, "Oh look, that's my uncle, he's waving at me." The creep looked in that direction, but either didn't care or could tell that I was lying. I kept on telling him that my uncle who waved back is a big angry man and that if I won't come down this instant and go home, we both are going to be in trouble. He didn't budge. He got even closer and eventually pressed me against the railing. He kept on asking me weird questions whilst I was terrified to move because I didn't want to move my body against his, if that makes any sense, so I just froze. He asked me if I would come on a date with him and that he's looking for a girlfriend. And at that particular moment, someone was coming up the stairs to the tower, so he let me go, but asked me to come back. I have not told anyone about this encounter at that stage because I was afraid that my parents would get angry. I also felt very embarrassed and thought that people would judge me for what happened. Sometime later I was home and it was around 9 p.m. I know the time because it was my bedtime. Suddenly a car came into our driveway. I came to see who it was through the front room window and I could see it was the creep, but this time with other guys, blasting music in his car and shouting my name. I have no idea how he knew where I lived. He must have followed me one day. My dad was outraged. He asked me who these people were, but before I could even answer, he rushed outside. Apparently, the creep asked for me to go out with him and his friends. My dad obviously refused, saying that I'm a child and too young to hang out with them or go out at this time of night, and that if he sees any one of them ever again, he'll beat the living daylights out of them. So, they took off. I was so upset with my dad that he had called me a child in front of them. So stupid looking back. I think because we lived so far away from everything, I was really keen to make friends as there were no kids around as such. For a while after that, I hadn't seen the creep or heard of him. A significant time later, I was walking to my dad's work again, and I've completely forgotten about that guy. He was working in the docks too with his friends, maybe those that came with him that night in the car, or maybe these were just his coworkers. I got scared when I saw him and even thought he shouted hi, and I pretended not to know him. He said something to his friends, and I remember so clearly how one of his friends exclaimed loudly, "Her?" I guess he had told them about me or his interest in me, but no one had expected me to be a child. I looked at the guy that exclaimed. He was staring at me in utter disbelief. He must have been 20 to 25, I think, and the creep was saying something to him. His friends screamed to him, "Have you lost your mind?" Clearly the creep didn't see me as a child like everyone else did. Fast forward again, maybe half a year later. One day I'm home alone in the evening waiting for my parents to come home from work. We lived in a very safe community, so sometimes I'd be home by myself for a little bit after school till my parents got home. I was playing a game whereby I was a singer. I had this sort of makeshift stage created in the living room, and I was performing in front of the chairs, pretending the chairs were filled with a live audience. It was pitch black outside. At some point during my performance, I see someone staring at me through the living room window. That person must have been crouching down, as only the top of their face could be seen from the bottom. As soon as that person realized I saw them, they ran away. I was so embarrassed that someone saw me performing, and scared and shocked at the same time, that I was literally glued to the floor. I don't know whether that was him. Our dog didn't react at all, maybe because music was playing very loud. I was scared to go outside the house to check, but peered through the window. However, no one was there. That person had to climb over a wooden fence to get to our living room window. I told my parents about it. I've also asked my friend whether it was him who had came around, but he said it wasn't him. I don't know if my friend felt shy to admit he was watching me or whether it actually was that creep. But to finish up the story, one day I went to the docks too with my dad, as my dad needed something from there for work. I saw the old guard that I knew well and asked about that creep and was told that he doesn't work there anymore. I honestly don't know what happened to him, and I never told my parents to the extent of what happened. This story takes place when I was around 16 to 17 years old. I lived with just my dad in a little apartment in a questionable area. It was the type of area you'd not want to be out and about when the sun goes down. Up until a certain time, like 10 to 11 p.m., there would be a cop or two in the area patrolling and making sure there's no gang activity going on. I had a job at a restaurant in the city, which was about a 30-minute car ride and an hour-and-a-half train ride. The train was a couple of blocks away from my place since my dad was always too lazy or hungover to drive me, and that was my main form of transportation. I went to work at around 3 p.m. and would usually get home at around 12 or 1 a.m. This was my schedule 4 days a week aside from having school. I would see a lot of familiar faces on the train because of this, but we never really made conversation with each other. Until one night, when I got out of work late because some idiots wanted to sit in the restaurant past closing. You know those people. And thanks to them, I missed my train. The next one wasn't scheduled to arrive for another hour, so having nowhere to go and no money left for Lyft or Uber, I sat there waiting. No one was around me, so when this older man showed up, kind of staggering a bit, I assumed he was another drunken hobo in the city trying to catch a train to sleep in. Something about his face gave me deja vu, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I've just seen him on the train here and there. He made his way over to me, much to my discomfort, and started up a conversation. He wasn't slurring, but the way he was looking down at me gave me goosebumps. He asked me why I was out there so late, all by myself. I had to reply as to not anger him. I mean, we were alone and he was close enough to me to pull out a knife or something. I had no idea. Anyway, I told him I was waiting for the train and he asked which one. Now, the train was color-coded with a strip at the top to indicate whether it goes north, south, east, or west areas. And I took blue, but I lied and said I took green. He looked at the schedule above the benches and saw that the green train was coming in 15 minutes, so he said that he'd keep me company. For those extremely long 15 minutes, he asked me how long I had been working at so-and-so restaurant, and this made my blood run cold as ice. I never told him where I worked. I just looked at him and very timidly answered, "For a year?" And he laughed, and he responds, "Wow, it's already been a whole year, huh?" At this point, my skin was itching out of anxiety, and as soon as the green train came, I knew I had no choice but to take it. I said goodbye to him and thanked him for the chat, hoping that would be the end of it. No. He suddenly told me that he took the green train too, so he followed me on and sat in the seat behind me. My mind was racing about whether he was going to try to do something to me like chloroform or hurt me in some other way, but we rode the train in silence. I was trying to figure out how I was going to lose him. There weren't many other people riding the train at that hour. Our car was empty, unfortunately. As the ride went on in menacing silence, I could feel him staring down the back of my neck. I waited until we got to a stop where there was another person, and I was so relieved to see a woman sitting there. She wasn't boarding, so I immediately got off the train and the man followed me, as expected. I took a seat on the bench next to hers, close enough for her to see and hear everything going on, hoping she would catch on. The man notified that I was sniffling, allergies and being out in the cold, and asked if I was sick. I told him no, but he insisted on giving me these weird pills that he had that were supposedly cold medicine. I declined in a louder voice. Sorry. Don't accept pills from strangers." This prompted the lady to look at us, and I made eye contact with her, and she knew now. Now, this went on until a blue train came and the lady got up, giving me a look that told me to get on with her. So without explanation, I did. She waved me over to sit next to her, and when the man tried to follow, she said, "No, you go sit over there," and made him sit a couple of seats across from us. He chose the one where he could face us and stared at me the entire time. I was shaking and about to burst into tears. The woman leaned over and whispered to me that she had a pistol, and I felt safer with her there. We whispered back and forth about what happened. I told her where I lived and how I was worried he would follow me home. She told me a friend of hers would be boarding the train soon, and when he did, she told me his name was Ray. Ray was filled in about everything and agreed to escort me home. She promised me that I could trust him. The two of them waited with me until I got to my stop. The man, still watching me, started to smile widely, resembling the Cheshire Cat. He shouted, "This your place, right?" To which I didn't respond and just gave the woman a hug and thanked her. Ray and I hurriedly hopped off the train, and as I looked back, I saw that the woman had pulled out her pistol and told the man to sit back down, even blocking the exit with her body. I finally let myself cry in relief. Ray walked me home and tried to calm me down by telling me about his job and his family. After watching me get inside the gates of my apartment safely, I thanked him profusely for his help. It chills me to think about how that night would have turned out if I hadn't met up with that woman and her friend. I feel extremely lucky to this day. I never saw that man again and eventually stopped thinking about him, but in the back of my head, that creepy, aroused smile of his was burned into my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder just what else he knew about me. It's hard for me to write this out because it has only been a year since it stopped. It started in 2014 and it happened in my home country of Sweden when I went to an art school for a summer course as a form of daily activity. The people at this art school were some of the worst people I'd ever met, and that included me because I was kind of trash back then too. I was 21 years old and had little experience of the real world. I had gone 2 extra years of schooling because of switching majors and taking an extra year on my second choice, so I was literally on my first year of independence. I also had a light form of autism and didn't receive schooling until I was 12, which made me a bit more slowly developed mentally during high school. I'm all caught up now, but basically I was a 21-year-old with very little life experience. The people I met at the art school were not, let's say, the highest of achievers. They were some of the meanest and most terrible people I'd ever met. They treated each other and me awful, and as well as the teachers, but I was quite the little turd too. In fact, I feel like being around these people also made me worse. What started the stalking was an incident involving acrylic paint. It was going to be thrown away, so some of us took some of the paint so it wouldn't go to waste, and I finally took the remaining paint. Well, it's over, showed up. Her name was Anna, and this is how she introduced herself. My art teacher was pushing these big tables on a trolley through the narrow passageway of the art hall, and Anna, dressed in expensive designer clothes, stood in her way. So my art teacher, not fearing anything, screams, "Move it." And Anna snaps towards her with this crazy look in her eyes and shouts, "Excuse me? Do you know who I am? I'm a famous woman." My art teacher, not impressed, responds with, "Okay, famous woman, move it." That was how we learned of Anna, the famous artist. She then proceeded to have all the terrible people in my class schmooze over her and treat her like a celebrity. But the real reason for being there was because of her paint. So, the great hunt began. I was roped into it, and my initial plan was to just give her back her paint so she could be off. Except during the hunt, I got these terrifying red flags. She kept sniffing the paint of other people to see if it was hers. Apparently, she had poured some kind of oil into the paint so she could sniff her way to where they were. During the hunt, she admitted that she had been put into treatment for the criminally insane because she had stalked a previous schoolmate that she thought had stolen paint from her. She even showed a CCTV video of her old schoolmate pulling a suitcase behind her, saying that that's where she had the paint that she stole. I asked her how she had got this video, that she said that her dad had connections with the local government, which had gotten the video from one of the local government's cameras, which is illegal for a layman to get access to. During this time, she also admitted that she had been sending messages to a famous artist in Örebro because a voice from heaven told her to do it, and that he was destined to help her with her career. Anna also thought that staring wide-eyed made her more attractive, like the kind of stare where you can't see any of the eyelids at all. So while she was saying all this, she had this crazy-eyed look on her face. I was terrified of her and couldn't figure out a way of handing back the paint, so she ended up threatening to have the principal fired if she couldn't search every room for the paint. And when she did find all of her paint, she put it in one of the school's rooms and said that she would pick it up when she wanted to. She said that she would come every year during the art exhibit to check if her paint was still there, and that she would sue the school if she found it missing. What a crazy person. An end of story, right? Oh, how I wish. About 2 years later, I enrolled in a 1-year basic art program at the school. I had completely forgotten about this crazy person. At one point, we were cleaning out the art rooms and her paint was brought up again, and would again be thrown away. Me, not remembering that crazy, famous artist, took a nice crimson bottle for myself, while others took some of the not-ruined color, as open acrylics go bad after a while. Then, as we all tried to continue with our lives, the crazy lady one day returned and started sniffing all the color. I didn't recognize her at all and had forgotten how dangerously deranged she was. I'd even forgotten that I had gotten the crimson color from her paint, so when she started interrogating me for why the paint smelled like hers, I didn't know what to say. She also smelled her paint at some other girl's table and was harassing her as well. Thinking that this was all more fuss than it was worth, I threw away the crimson paint. It had started to cut from age anyways. And that is when everything just went absolutely nuts and crazy-eyed Anna became my stalker. When she found out that I had thrown away the paint, she became convinced that I had re-enrolled at the art school specifically to steal her paint. She started convincing a bunch of gullible and, to be honest, low-achieving people that this was true, and I started being harassed. It started with a physical attack. I was painting alone in the evening, minding my own business, when this huge brute ran into me, tackled me to the floor, and hit and kicked me. While this was happening, crazy-eyed Anna was fake crying in the corner, but I could see on the floor how she went from fake crying into gleefully smiling as I was being kicked and hit. Another girl she had recruited picked up and smashed my phone, breaking it. As the guy stormed off and the second girl followed, I stumbled onto my feet and asked Anna why she had done this, and the answer she gave me made me realize what kind of person she was. "So you will know that I can hurt you if I want." This was the answer she gave me. I later asked the brute of a person why he had attacked me, and he said that he hated people who stole. This guy is training now to become an art teacher, and I fear for those children. I had bruised my ribs, but were not allowed to go to the hospital because the principal didn't want to get involved, and since my phone was broken, I couldn't even call for an ambulance, so it took so long to get to the hospital that the outside signs of the abuse had healed. During this time, crazy-eyed Anna started wearing a crimson jacket wherever she went. I asked her why she was wearing it and also said she looked pretty, thinking that talking nicely to her would start a friendly conversation to maybe smooth everything over. Well, Anna is not like normal people and does not think like normal people. Her response was that she wanted to think of every time I saw this color and said that she had seen it work in a movie. She then added, "I am more beautiful than you will ever be." Whenever she went, she had a horde of schmoozers around her, all thinking she was some kind of famous and fancy artist. But eventually she had to leave school and I thought I had peace. Except she one day suddenly showed up and gleefully presented me with the school's Russian exchange student. This student had been sitting at my table every day for weeks, and I hadn't paid it any mind. Why would I? She was allowed to sit there, but this is when the crazy-eyed Anna drops the bombshell that this exchange student was A, not a real exchange student, and B, she had been putting her phone on the table each mealtime while having it on speaker with Anna on the other end, silently listening in on my conversations. I remember when she first told me this, how I didn't believe it. I didn't believe, and a part of me still had a hard time realizing the lengths this woman was going to and that they were real. But it was what she said next that terrified me the most. She said, "I know about the secret messages behind your words. I know what you're up to. And I heard a voice from above that told me that it was my mission in life to keep an eye on you and to make sure you behave." The abuse at school escalated quickly after this. I was harassed and cornered in every classroom and chased around school, and at the same time I got zero help. It escalated into a happening one late weekend night. I was sitting in the school's texture room when a guy suddenly burst in and started running towards me screaming, "What makes you think you can sit here?" He did not go to the school. I jumped out of a window and started running towards my dorm and managed to call 112 in the meantime, the emergency number in Sweden, and managed to scream out that I needed help and where I was. I ran towards my dorm, but another guy was waiting for me there, so I ran towards the head building, but a third guy was waiting there. They cornered me, and I remembered how terrified I was. I thought I was going to die. But then there was a light of hope, blue and red lights from the road, and I was saved. I remember how happy I was to see that police officer. Everything would finally be over, and then he walked up to the girl who orchestrated all of it, Malin, and he greeted her like a friend, and I knew it. I knew at that moment that he wouldn't save me. I screamed for help and he ignored me. She told him that there was no issue here. He said he was looking forward to seeing her around town. And then he left. He left me. He just drove away. The last thing I remember is the backlights of that police car driving away. I wake up the next morning laying on the ground with a huge bump on the side of my head. I don't know what happened. Malin claims they never touched me and I just passed out when one of the guys grabbed me. But I knew better. I know the pain I felt in the huge bump on the side of my head. I called 112 again and called for an ambulance. And this time, because of the abuse, I had memory loss and couldn't quite tell the lady what the issue was, but I made a mistake. I told her that I had called 112 the day after and that a police officer just left me. And she got mad. Really, really mad. She told me that I was slandering her coworker and to only call if I actually needed help, and then she hung up. And I was alone again, with no one, not a single person on my side. I tried to make a police report against Anna and Malin, but the officer had heard about me and deleted my report. It was during this time that I had enough and thought about ending my own life, so I was forcefully put in a mental health ward. And the stalking didn't stop. Crazy-eyed Anna had a friend of hers be committed so she could come into the ward as a visitor in order to harass me. When I tried to go to art school again, she had people she had threatened join the same program so they could keep an eye on me. At home, she would have another guy she had threatened to park outside my house a few times a week in order to scare me. During this, she would also have things stolen from me, things like shoes, gloves, and the like, and according to the people doing the stealing, this is because she had watched a movie where someone steals items and then puts them back to make someone go insane from the harassment. Crazy-eyed Anna would call me a few times a year lying about being a data collector to get private information out of me, something that took a few years to even catch on to. Because she lived in a big city far away at the time, she constantly forced others to do the stalking for her. Most of them had at one point given drugs to and then would get them to do what she wanted by threatening to report them to the police if they wouldn't. Others she just bribed with money or charmed. I have gone for hour-long bus rides where someone admits to being there for her sake. Most people are afraid of her because she won't leave them alone, and she will do to them what she does for me if they don't say yes to her. One girl was roped into standing all dressed in red outside my supermarket. Another girl was also roped into sitting with her car outside my house for a few hours, a few days a week, all because of fear of this woman. I learned from a cousin of hers that she affords all of this because she won an art prize for 500,000 kroner at one point. That's why she thinks she's famous. I also learned that most of her biological family has cut contact with her because she has been doing this since she was a teenager, and yet even with that information, no one would listen. When I tell people what she had done to me, people call me the crazy one. I have no history of delusions or of making up tall tales, yet it was so much easier for people to just think I'm crazy. I have even been forcefully medicated at some points with psychosis medication that baffled doctors lamented over not working. Not even my family believes me, something that has forever barred how much trust I can put into the relationship between us. I asked her once why she was doing all of this, and she said, "To punish you." I asked her for how long I would need to be punished, and she answered, "For as long as I want." At one point, I even considered killing her. I'm the kind of person who catches flies alive in a cup and let them out the window. I have never harmed another human being. I have never been violent. Yet at one point, I felt so desperate for freedom that I would take prison rather than being haunted by crazy-eyed Anna anymore. I was more afraid of her than imprisonment. And then, it stopped. It just stopped. Still a year later, I don't know why it stopped. Nothing in her history tells me that she would stop willingly, so I'm convinced that either she had run out of people to threaten into doing her bidding, or something has happened to her. It's possible that one of those people finally reported her and actually got taken seriously. I'm not sure. Even so, I can't feel relief. Not yet. I'm still afraid it'll start again, and I have given up all hope of being taken seriously by the police. My dad and I live together in our own multi-family home in Germany. My dad has a serious lung condition. His lungs produce and trap an excessive amount of mucus. The trapped amount is huge and keeps his lungs from working correctly. It's pretty normal that he has to be picked up by an ambulance every 2 to 3 weeks because he can't breathe anymore. Last week, it was that time of the month. He couldn't breathe. I called an ambulance and he was brought to the closest hospital. Pretty normal for me because this happened at least 10 times in the last 6 months. So I went to bed after he got picked up on a Tuesday. I went to work the next morning and got a text from him that he has to stay for at least 2 more days, so approximately till Friday. Wednesday evening, I get home from work and played as much Rogue Company when someone suddenly rang the doorbell. That's unusual because we never have unannounced visitors. I walked to the door and was about to press the door buzzer to open the main door when I heard, I believe, more than one voice directly in front of my door, so that someone just got past the main door, which was weird. I asked in German, "Hello, who is it?" And there was silence for 3 seconds. Then a person who sounds like my father but at the same time doesn't sound like my father answers, "Micah, it's me. I forgot my keys. Open the door." I thought, okay, in that case. Wait a minute. My dad never calls me Micah, only Mickey. And there was the sarcastic tone in that voice. I didn't trust the situation, and I called my father on his phone. If the person in the front of my door was my father, his phone should ring, right? It didn't. My father answered, and as I suspected, he was still in the hospital. Meanwhile, the 2 persons on the other side of the door heard my phone call and started kicking my door. "Let me in, Micah, it's your daddy. Let me in." Thank God the door was reinforced. After I threatened them with calling the police and having a huge knife in my hand, they left. I heard their footsteps running down the staircase. I rushed to a window facing the street to check if I can see a car or a license plate, but they were gone, just a few footsteps in the distance. They never came back, and what's weird is that they knew my name and that my father wasn't home despite his car standing in the driveway. Stuff was hitting the fan when a buddy of mine actually reported something similar. We called the police, but an investigation is currently in progress. For context, I'm a 25-year-old woman who is 3 months pregnant. The two people involved in this incident are myself and my brother-in-law, who is 19. For the sake of the story, I'll call him Jack. Now, Jack is very street smart, and on top of that, a brown belt in some martial art, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I believe, so he definitely knows how to hold his own in any difficult situation. He is the outspoken younger child in his family as compared to my husband's softer demeanor. Being only two siblings, my husband and Jack are very close. Jack currently lives with my husband and myself. I live in a small town in California, and the three of us live in a small 2-bedroom apartment. It isn't special or anything, but considering how close the three of us are and all the fun we have, it's home. The downside is that while we have good neighbors and everything, the neighborhood isn't that great. A lot of gang-related crimes have taken place over the years, and drug abuse is common on the streets. Now, being pregnant, I had the usual weird cravings, and on that particular night, I was dying for pickles. Naturally, we didn't have any at our place, so the plan of action was to go and get them at 1 a.m. There is a commercial area about a 25-minute walk from our apartment complex with a huge Walmart. So, that is our go-to for anything we needed. My husband was away on a business trip for the weekend, so Jack was on my beck and call for everything. I had told him about my craving, and he got ready to leave right away. Not wanting to stay home at the time of night, I decided to go along with him. I figured the fresh air would be good for me, and I felt like I could use a walk, so off we went. It was a bit chilly that night, and naturally I didn't realize it, so I had to make do in a tank top and yoga pants. That is, until Jack gave me his jacket. We had a really pleasant walk all the way to the store, talking about everything and nothing and enjoying the walk in general. We got to Walmart at around 1:25 to 1:30 a.m. and spent around a half hour there. Since I frequently visit the store a lot, I'm friendly with a few of the employees working there, so I spent some time talking to them as well. I got my pickles and a few other groceries that needed restocking. I also got a few things off my maternity checklist in case I didn't forget to do so later. Jack got a few things that he needed, and saying our goodbyes, we left. I'll admit, I'm very naive, which I think is probably because of my sheltered upbringing. We were at the edge of the parking lot of the entire commercial area when we crossed a group of 4 greasy guys in their late 20s hanging around. I caught them staring, but since I had just started showing, I didn't make much of it. There weren't many cars around either, since it was very late at night. Jack and I started our journey back once again, cracking jokes and messing around with each other. He made a joke about naming my baby after him if I had a son. We were just goofing around, and little did I know how quickly that would change. Only a few minutes into our walk back home, Jack's demeanor suddenly changed. Now, I've known Jack since he was 12, and I've always known him to be very laid back and carefree. His breathing became very erratic, and he was laughing way too loud at anything I was saying, and he was twirling around like he was dancing every few seconds. I thought he was just messing around with me, as I'm a dance instructor, but something just wasn't right the way he was acting. He started laughing all of a sudden and said, "I dare you to shuffle sideways across the road to the other sidewalk." I thought this was a very weird request, but since I was in a good mood, I thought why not, and just went for it. Jack followed right next to me, doing a weird little dance which didn't really make any sense. I started to giggle at him when we started walking again on the other side of the road this time. Any signs of discomfort he was showing earlier had all disappeared, so I figured he only wanted to make our tedious walk home more entertaining. Okay, now back to our side of the road. I looked at him weirdly, and he had this wide grin on his face. Once again, I couldn't say no to him, so we did the same thing back. We both were laughing like crazy, and I was in an even better mood than earlier. This time, however, I noticed that same group of 4 guys walking about 30 yards behind us. I thought it was a bit strange, but didn't think of it as being too strange. Maybe they were just going home too, I thought. About 10 minutes had passed since we left Walmart, and we had arrived near a residential area. No apartment buildings, but typical Californian homes with large backyards, etc. This particular residential area was to our left, and for our apartment, we had to go straight for at least another 2 blocks. Now this is where it starts to get creepy and straight up terrifying. Instead of going straight like we were supposed to, Jack challenged me to a race. We turned left on the end of the block, run the length of houses, and come back. This is very strange. He was adamant about it, but there was something different this time. He still had that weird laugh going on, but his eyes told a different story. He looked desperate, as if he really wanted me to say yes. I noticed those guys were still strolling behind us, which at that point were alarm bells in my head. I agreed to race and he gave me a head start. I could see those guys staring at us out of the corner of my eye. They just stopped and were simply looking in our direction, making me feel very uneasy. Jack made a big show of counting down from 3 and we took off. Literally 5 seconds into our race, once we were out of sight, Jack put his hand over my mouth and dragged me to the house on our left and into the bushes. I was about to scold him for cheating when he hissed at me that we were being followed. The terrified look on his face was all I needed to see to know that he was right. I felt my heart sink down into my stomach. I could feel myself throwing up any second and I had tears welling up. There was no time for any of that though, because we heard voices almost instantly. Jack pushed me further under the bushes and he positioned himself right next to me, both of us pretty concealed by now. Sure enough, all 4 of them had turned left onto the street and they just stood there looking around. The street lights were fairly dim, so it was pretty dark. One of them said, "I didn't know these knocked-up hoes could run this fast." Another guy mentioned something about how he thought the kid was onto them. What he said next sent shivers up my spine. "I got my knife here for her. She can't resist what I say with a knife on her throat. We'll dump the kid somewhere. Don't worry about that, little mongrel." I could feel my throat closing up. It got difficult to breathe by the second, but it wasn't over yet. Their sort of leader decided to look around for us. They split up and the 2 of them came in our direction. My heart came all the way into my throat as I literally froze. The fear of getting caught was like ice running through my veins. One of them came up and stood right next to where we were hiding and started smoking a cigarette. The other 3 were nearby and they were going through the neighborhood looking for us. I was sure that the guy closest to us would find us as he was only a few steps away. Jack turned to look at me and I could see the fear in his face. He raised his finger to his mouth, signaling to be extra quiet. The smoker guy was pacing around us slowly. Luckily it was dark, so that played to our advantage. After what seemed like an eternity, but was actually only 30 minutes, they regrouped in the middle. One of them made a call, telling someone to bring the car around. Another 5 minutes had gone by when the car finally arrived and the men, all looking angry, drove off. It was too dark to clearly get to the number plate, but I made a mental note of the model and color of the car. We waited for a while before getting out from the undergrowth and brushed ourselves off. I couldn't hold it any longer and I burst into tears. Jack, too, with glistening eyes, hugged me, but he didn't for long. He wanted to get home as quickly as possible before those men had any chance of coming back. We got our grocery bags, which were all muddy now, and made our way back home. I felt like they would pull up behind us at any second. Luckily, though, we made it back without any further issues. I collapsed onto the couch the minute we entered and double-checked the locks. I was sobbing my eyes out and trying not to throw up. Jack was trying to keep it together, but I felt like he would start crying any minute as well. I honestly felt so stupid and ashamed. Here I was, 6 years older than my brother-in-law, who looks at me as the older sister he never had, and he was the one consoling me. We stayed that way for a while, and when he told me to get some rest, it was almost 3 a.m. I didn't have the mental capacity to do anything else, so I just went to my room and passed out in the bed. I had a load of missed calls when I woke up from my husband. Jack had called him and told him what had happened. He told me that he would be coming back that very day, which I was very happy about. I also told Jack how grateful I was for him being with me. We have since tried to move on from the real-life nightmare, but I still feel like something is bothering me. My apartment is on the 4th floor and has a clear view of the road outside. Now, I don't know if it's my mind playing tricks on me, but I'm fairly certain I've seen those guys coming and hanging around the apartment complex at night. I've also seen them driving slowly around in what I'm sure is the same car I saw that night. I'd never feared for my life or felt in any sort of danger the way I have these past few days. We filed a police report, but we haven't heard anything. so far. This happened many years ago. I was 8 or so at the time, and every day I would walk home from my elementary school. My house was a few miles down the road, so my mother thought it would be safe enough for me to walk by myself. It was a few months into the school year when it started happening. A beat-up-looking Toyota would slow down enough for a couple of white guys that looked like they were in their mid to late 20s to follow me and yell insults. I was chubby back then, so they would call me fat and much more hurtful things. I always remember the driver. He looked to be the oldest of the bunch, with greasy blonde hair hanging down and partially covering his pimple-scarred face. They would follow me until I reached the gas station that was halfway along my journey home. Then they would speed off, laughing loudly. For the first couple of weeks, I didn't tell anyone, thinking that they would get tired of it, and they didn't. A full month passed before I told my mother about it. She, of course, was rightly concerned about me and asked me how long it had been going on for. When I told her a month, she grew even more concerned. Her being a single mom, she couldn't pick me up from school because she was at work all day, so her solution was to send my older brother to meet me halfway, thinking this would deter them. It didn't. Another 4 months went by with them continuing to follow me and throw insults. And suddenly, it stopped. A whole month went by without them driving by, and we thought everything was safe again. But we were wrong. Out of the blue, I saw the old beat-up Toyota heading down the road towards me. Only the driver was in the car this time. He slowed down the car, flung open the passenger door, and proceeded to yell for me to get into the car. I was so scared I couldn't even speak. I just shook my head no and tried to walk faster. He continued to follow me, demanding that I get into his car. I'll never forget the look on his face as he yelled at me. It was so full of rage. We finally got to the gas station that I made a break for it. I ran inside the gas station and up to the gas station attendant. I told him what was happening, and he let me hide behind the counter. The driver pulled into the gas station, hopped out of the car, and came in. He demanded that the gas station attendant tell him where I was, claiming I was his daughter, and I jumped out of his car. The gas station attendant glanced down at me, and I shook my head wildly, mouthing that I didn't know this man. The gas station attendant said he didn't know what he was talking about, and that he had to leave the store immediately. The driver began to yell wildly and started walking around the store looking for me. The gas station attendant said that he was going to call the police if the man didn't leave. The man turned to him and said something I'll never forget. "I'll get her, one way or another." The driver stormed out of the gas station and left. I sat there on the floor crying for what felt like hours. The gas station attendant called the police and had them come over. When the police arrived, the attendant told them what had happened. A police officer knelt down beside me and asked me my side of the story, and I told the officer everything. How him and a couple of others had been following me for months, how they would follow me and insult me, how they suddenly stopped, and how he had tried to get me into his car. I don't remember much afterwards other than them calling my mother and her meeting at our house. They took my mother's statement and they left. After that, my mother changed her work hours in order to come get me every day. For years, I lived in fear that that man with the greasy hair and pimple-scarred face would eventually get to me. My brother and I worked across the street from a mini storage place, and roughly 2 years ago, we noticed they had an auction sign out front. We decided to check it out, so we walked over hoping to find something interesting. If you haven't watched Storage Wars, the way these work is the auctioneer opens the unit and you're not allowed to enter or touch anything. You only have a window of about 15 seconds to look around and decide if you want to bid. This unit was 4x4, and my brother and I noticed a group of 5 fishing poles amongst other boxes and bags. We had been talking about buying a few poles, and this seemed like a good chance, so we yelled out a low bid and won. Per the auction rules, we had until the end of the day to empty out the unit. Being small, this was a 2 garbage can job, so we got a can and started sorting. It started out promising with finding a nice microscope and a few tools, etc., standard storage stuff, I pulled out a plastic garbage bag and opened it to find another tied-shut garbage bag, which I opened to find another tied-shut garbage bag. And since nothing terrifying is ever kept in triple-tied bags, I opened it to find the dried, mummified remains of a very old and very dry cat. My brother and I just stopped and stared at each other, and since neither of us needed a dried-out cat at the moment, we weren't sure how to handle this specific piece of storage unit treasure. We did what we always do when faced with something like this out of context. We just laughed uncomfortably until we looked back into the unit and noticed 2 more tied-up garbage bags. At the end of the day, we found 3 total bags with parts of or entire cats. We also aren't doctors, but we're pretty sure there are at least some dog parts in there as well. Granted, saying it was a storage unit full of dead cats would be a bit of an exaggeration, but considering that a storage unit generally has no dead cats, I think a small unit with 3 or 4 could be considered full. As if multiple bags of dead cats wasn't bad enough, the creepiest part about the whole thing was finding his or her creepy drawings of cats in a used pink cat food and water bowl. I spoke with the manager of the storage facility and explained my findings and asked who owned that unit. Obviously, they couldn't give me the name, but when I asked if they were perhaps a vet, the owner laughed and said, "Definitely not." He also said that helps explain why the person's other abandoned unit that had gone up for auction prior had been full of empty plastic cat carriers.
Last December, I fled an abusive relationship and crashed with my friend Amy. She lives in an upper-level duplex that's quite small, and I stayed there for a while with my cat and dog, which was a lot as she has a dog also. Next door to the duplex is an old 4-bedroom house that's owned by Mark, a friend of Amy's who lives abroad. The couple who was renting out Mark's place bought a house and moved out. They suggested to me that it would be a great place for me to stay while I continued my apartment search. I was absolutely elated and agreed immediately. Mine and Amy's dog could play every day, and we could still see each other all the time. I was excited at the opportunity and paid Mark a little rent, but mostly he just wanted to help me out with my situation and someone to house sit until he came home in May. I live in a very cold and snowy climate, so looking for a place in May is exponentially easier. Amy informed me the house had quirks and a creepy basement, and told me if I ever felt creeped out in there all alone, I could come back whenever. She lived in that house for a couple years, so I took her word for it. When one of the tenants showed me the place for the first time, I definitely felt something very off. I chalked it up to the weird layout, the draft, and the lack of sunlight in the rear of the house. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom in the middle. The front bedroom was warm and sunny, and the rest of the upstairs was very cold, noticeably colder than the rest of the house. Upon entering the back upstairs bedroom, it felt like a downward shift. Like the energy in that room felt so strange, and I felt like I wasn't wanted in there, so I barely looked around and just closed the door behind me. The first couple weeks, nothing much happened, but I never felt at ease. I felt like I was being watched. I wrote it off as being easily spooked in a large house, and it was my first time living alone. I started having trouble sleeping despite my room being the only place in the house I felt at ease. One night I decided to smoke some weed and watch a movie in the living room kind of late at night. I fell asleep on the couch and woke up to what I swore was someone running up the stairs and then slamming the back bedroom door. My dog looked startled too and ran upstairs and started growling at the closed door. No one was in there. I decided to lay off the weed, but some nights after that, I heard footsteps pacing in the back room. The next thing that started happening was while I was in the bathtub in the upstairs bathroom. My dog would lay in the doorway and just stare at the back room. Sometimes he'd growl or bark at it. I'd also come home to find the door open when I definitely had shut it, or I'd hear my cat meowing to be let in the room. On a couple occasions, I found my cat shut in the room. Also around this time, my bath towel went missing and I looked absolutely everywhere for it. It began to take a toll on me. I started having nightmares every night, and I'd wake up almost every night to my dog whining between 3 and 4 in the morning. I always felt like I was being watched, and the house felt so heavy. I told Amy about all this, and she confessed to me that she had had some weird experiences in the house when she lived there as well. Her bedroom was the back room, and a couple times she woke up in a semi-dream state to a man at the end of her bed and began talking to him. She then woke up for real and saw a text from her roommate asking who she was talking to. She'd also see things moving out of the corner of her eye, hear footsteps, and feel like she was being watched. She told me of one instance of seeing footsteps in the snow going from the back door to the middle of the lawn and then disappearing. One day I was in the living room, hearing footsteps and just feeling so overwhelmed by the presence I was crying and decided to have a go talking to it. I said, "Hey, I know this is your house too. I'm leaving in a month. I've been through so much pain these past few months. Please, just leave me alone. Please let me know you've heard me." Then the door upstairs slammed, and that was the last I heard for a while. My nightmares stopped. I started sleeping through the night and felt less of a presence. One night I was hanging out with Amy in her backyard with our dogs and her downstairs neighbor Sam to celebrate me finding an apartment. I went back in the house for some more beers and to grab a sweater. I went to run up the stairs, and standing there at the top was an opaque black silhouette. I couldn't make out any features, but it was as real as a person standing there. I screamed and ran back down and turned on the stairway light, only to find that no one was there and the back room was open. Finally, my move-out date had arrived, and I felt so relieved to feel absolutely nothing in my new apartment. I went back to the house one last time to check and see if I forgot anything, and there, right in the middle of the floor of the back room, was my bath towel, still slightly damp as if I had just used it. I haven't been back since.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.
I live in Alberta, Canada. This story takes place in June of 2015. I was 28 years old and my fiancé was 32. I'll call him Kay for the story. It was going to be a very hot day, for we had just purchased our first car after years of taking public transit and decided to go for an overnight trip to Jasper Park. To anyone who doesn't know, Jasper Park is a beautiful stretch of highway that runs through the foothills into the Rockies right around there. I'm not sure what it is like in other countries, but here in the parks and wooded areas, it's not uncommon for people to pull off on the side of the highway and hike into areas for day trips or even to camp to avoid the overcrowded campgrounds. We had been on the road for about 4 hours, and I was starting to feel cramped when we came to an area with a beautiful glacier river running next to the highway. So we decided to pull off the road onto an old maintenance road that ran down what we thought was the train tracks that ran parallel to the road. The road was extremely overgrown and had railroad ties sticking up vertically about
2 feet out of the ground in an attempt to block the road permanently, but they were spaced apart far enough for a very small vehicle to get through. Well, our new car happened to be one of those tiny economy class cars, so we decided to try and fit past the barrier. So Kay got out and directed me through the small opening in between the posts, and to my surprise, we fit. He decided it would be best for him to walk in front of me and lead me through the overgrown path while I crept the car forward in case there were any rocks or stumps that could damage the very low undercarriage of our new car. After about 15 feet into the road, the grass suddenly became taller than my car, and the trees thick and brushing against the roof, and the path was dark with light at the end that indicated a clearing. Basically, it looked like something out of one of those really corny camping horror movies. But we decided to go forward and came upon a clear-cut line. These lines are cut out by the government as surveyors and gas lines. Anyways, we went about 50 feet into the clearing that was surrounded by thick trees on all sides. After finding a flattish area where we could set up a makeshift camp, Kay decided to go and try to find where the river ran closest so we could go stick our feet in and cool down. I voiced concern about the bears in the area and wanted to keep the bear spray with me, so he took his wood axe with him. Side note, people don't have guns other than hunting rifles due to our gun laws, and due to this, we didn't have anything other than bear spray, pocket knives, and an axe for potential defense. I decided to start digging out our tent to look for a spot to set it up for the night. Kay was gone for about 5 minutes when I heard what looked like another vehicle close by. I didn't think anything of it at the time, thinking who else could possibly fit the car through there. So I brushed it off and continued what I was doing, but at the same time moved my can of bear spray out of the backpack to just inside of my trunk where I could grab it in a matter of seconds, just in case. After another minute or so, I just happened to look in the direction of the road that led us into the clearing, and to my surprise, I see a man walking towards me. He looked to be about 35 to 40 years old with a ball cap and dirty blue reflective coveralls on. You know, the ones you see the oil rig guys wear. After the complete shock of seeing someone, I started to notice I could not see his face that well, but he had on a ball cap and shades with a scruffy beard. He was walking directly towards me with his hands in his pockets. I started to panic a little and immediately called out for Kay and for him to get back here. I hear him yell something, but I refuse to take my eyes off the stranger who is now less than 20 feet away from me. Now I should mention that the area is known for hunting, but it was not the season. He reaches me and stops about 5 feet away, and me being the friendly person I am, I smile and say, "Hi, didn't expect to see anyone here." He looks at me from head to toe and stands there for what feels like forever and says, "Hello. What brings you here?" His tone very blank and not giving anything away. I say, My fiancé and I were just looking for a place to pop the tent for the night." He freezes at the mention of my fiancé. He looks around as he hears Kay coming through the woods to the right of us. The stranger, still gawking at me, does not move as Kay comes out of the tree line with his axe propped up on his shoulder. Kay looks at me and then the stranger and immediately speedwalks to my side, and being the cautious, overly protective guy he is, says, "Hey man, is there something I can help you with?" "No, just checking my trail cams." The guy then looks at Kay, assessing him and glaring at his axe. I ask him, "Oh, so you know the area. Do you know if it's okay for us to camp here for the night?" He looks directly at me and says, "Yeah, as long as you don't have a fire or anything, and once in a while service trucks come down here to survey." I respond, "Thanks for the heads up." He will not stop looking at me at this point. Kay sees this and decides he had had it enough and says again, "Is there something you needed?" The guy finally stops looking at me long enough to answer. "I was in here checking my trail cams and got a flat on my Jeep." He indicates the bumper of his Jeep that is just visible through the brush. He continues, "I tried to change my spare, but I have custom wheels and can't get the nuts off with the tools I have." Now, everyone in Alberta knows that guys with custom trucks or go off-roading always carry the proper tools. Alarm number 1. Kay and I walk closer to get a better view of his vehicle and note that it is one of those jacked up off-road Jeeps with the engine snorkel and everything. I remember the alarms going off in my head yelling at me that this is weird. Even I carry tools needed to switch out my tires. At this point, I notice his Jeep was blocking the only entrance into the clearing. I proceed to say, sorry, but as you can tell, I only have a small car and my tire iron is only big enough to fit the nuts for my 15-inch wheels in my car. I don't think we'll be able to help you. The guy starts to look annoyed as Kay and I start to move back to our car. The guy follows us back to our car, then says, well, could she possibly give me a lift to Jasper to get help? I immediately start to panic and say, well, my car is packed to the roof with camping gear. I'm one of those overpackers that has something for every situation. I'm not unloading all my stuff and leaving it here in the woods. The guy starts to get agitated, shifting back and forth in place. He then says, it'll only be a couple of hours and your fiancée can stay here with your stuff then. I'm about to say no when Kay says very plainly, I'm not letting her drive alone with you and leave me here in the woods. The guy looks at Kay and says, please, I just need a ride into town or at least to somewhere where I can get cell reception. Note, there is no reception in most of Jasper Park unless you have a booster or a satellite phone. Even then, it's patchy service, and the closest town is Jasper itself, which at this point was 2 hours away. He continues to try to get me to drive him by myself for another 5 minutes before we both get visibly irritated. Kay then says as calmly as he can, sorry man, you're gonna have to walk out to the road and hail someone down. Now the guy is mad and takes one last look at me and then turns around and walks towards the road. After he's out of sight, I immediately pack up the car and start to turn around and head for the clearing entrance. As we pull up to where his Jeep is blocking the access to the road, both Kay and I get out and investigate his Jeep. He didn't have a flat. There was nothing wrong with his Jeep at all. Kay decides to look in the back seat through the tinted windows. He all of a sudden panics and says we need to get out of here. I don't question him and get in the driver's seat while Kay takes his axe and clears away the brush on the side where his Jeep is blocking the exit. After about 10 minutes of pulling weeds, branches, and rocks, we make a space big enough to creep through. It takes us an additional 5 minutes to creep through the overgrown access back out to the highway. As we're pulling onto the highway, we can see the creep down a ways hitchhiking. Kay says just drive in the opposite direction. So we drive for about 15 minutes and decide to double back and see if he's still there. As we come up to an access again, we notice he is no longer on the side of the road. So we pull into the access road again where the makeshift barrier was and immediately notice his Jeep is gone. Kay freaks out and we back out of there and drive 45 minutes up the highway to a new spot. We find a nice calm area directly next to the highway where we can access the river. We hang out for a couple of hours while all the time keeping an eye out for the creepy guy. We kept hearing twigs snapping behind us in the overgrowth, but due to the events that day decided to err on the side of caution and not go investigate. I finally start to relax a little bit and just enjoy the sweltering heat. Around 6 p.m., it was starting to get dark because of the mountains blocking the sun, so Kay decides it's time to pack up and leave. I remind him that I had a couple of beers while sitting at the river, so I needed a nap before we could go anywhere. He agrees, and we go and sit in the car, which we had parked on a little makeshift rest area. We hunker down, and I try to doze off. Suddenly, Kay jerks up and says, "Did you hear that?" I'm still somewhat groggily from just passing out, respond, "No, what's going on?" "Quiet, quiet." But this time it's pitch black all around us. All of a sudden I hear it, the crunch of gravel and twigs as if someone is walking in wide circles around us. We looked at each other and then hear it again, this time closer to the front of the car. I squint as hard as I can and then immediately turn the key and turn on the lights. To our surprise, there is no one there.
Without saying anything, I decided that I had rested enough and my adrenaline was coursing through me. I turned the engine over and threw the car into reverse and headed back down the highway towards home. After about 20 minutes of nerve-wrenching silence and constantly checking our mirrors to see if anyone was following us, I break the silence and ask the question that has been bugging me. So now that we're out of there, what was in the back seat of his Jeep that made you freak out so bad? Kay looks at me, worry etched on his face, not normal for him at all. Takes a deep breath and says, "It's hard to see due to the tint, but I can make out a hunting rifle, which is not out of the ordinary here, but most disturbing was a roll of duct tape, rope, and a tarp." After seeing that, Kay freaked out, realizing this guy wanted more than just a ride from us. I switched up my career in healthcare to follow my dream of learning to work on cars. I was hired this past May at a dealership as a quick service mechanic and fell in love immediately with everything about it and my coworkers. I noticed how cute my trainer was. Not only was he cute, he was very patient with training me. I was so new to working on cars I needed to learn the basics, and he was so cute and nice about everything. I'll call him Nick. He was 40 years old, male. Me and Nick had hit it off in every way. He asked me on our first date to go geocaching. Swoon. Nick and I had been side by side since then. I loved everyone I worked with, always laughing and playing pranks on each other, but also always helping each other and busting our butts to make the customers happy. I should add that my best friend works there, and another good friend of ours had gotten hired too. We were a close-knit family in the quick service department. Well, I didn't make it past my probationary period because I was just a bit slower. So Nick has a full mechanic garage at his dad's place, and I'd meet him after he got off of work so we could make some side job money. So about a month and a half ago, Nick and I decided to get an apartment together, and it's been amazing. I've been bringing him to work, grabbing him on lunch break and picking him up, which I love because I can also say hey to all of my old coworkers. That being said, I should add that Nick doesn't have any social media and we are together literally all the time, except when he's working. And here's where things get crazy. I get a message request on Facebook from some random girl saying, "I can't believe what I'm seeing. Nick is my man, and he's in your profile photo with you. He's been my man for 7 months." I immediately went into panic mode. Called him at work asking who this girl is, and he was just as confused. The more I talked to this girl to try and figure out what is going on, the more she said weirdly specific things about Nick, like the truck he drives. They met at his dad's shop, which no one would know about his dad's shop because he never talks about it. She knew his phone number and everything, but she could never provide proof. Screenshot conversations, photos of the two of them, nothing. We got to a point where it felt like this whole thing was real and that her and I are going to team up. But she never answered my calls, only messages. But after Nick and I had a huge talk about it, I knew that something wasn't right about this girl. I had to get to the bottom of it. I started getting pretty scared when one day I dropped Nick off after lunch. A minute went by and I get a message saying, "Dang, Nick looks sexy in that hoodie today." This shook me up. I asked what color and she said the correct color. At this point, my first thought is stalker, like actually watching us. I told Nick about how she knew what he was wearing and he was super creeped out. Then when I pick him up, I usually park by the quiet side of the building where no one really can see me. This time though, a work truck drives by me really slowly. I pretend not to notice him because I was in no mood to chat with anyone, and I recognized the driver as a former coworker of mine that I'd only spoken to maybe 2 times during my time at the dealership. However, we were friends on Facebook. Within a minute of him passing me by, the girlfriend messages me saying, "You're waiting for Nick on the other side of the building right now." In that moment, I started to freak out. This dude is pretending to be my boyfriend's girlfriend. Then after talking to Nick about it,
Yeah, he's the only one from work that knew Nick's dad had a shop. Nick had worked on this guy's truck before. They aren't friends, but they do chat here and there. Well, not anymore. But I just don't know why. Why was he saying such gross things to me as he was pretending to be my boyfriend's girlfriend? If he's capable of doing this, who knows what else he's capable of? He's also a giant dude in his 40s with children of his own. I have no actual proof other than the fact that any time this girl was active, so was he. I see this dude every day, and Nick still works with him. He's in a different department than Nick, thank God. So yeah, still not sure what to do about this. But crazy former coworker pretending to be my boyfriend's girlfriend to get us to break up or something weird. I guess I'll see you tomorrow, unfortunately. I'm a 14-year-old boy from the UK, and this event happened to me about 3 weeks ago. So being a teenager, my friend, who I'll refer to as Jay, wanted to sneak out and meet up with one of our other friends, both girls, who I'll refer to as A and H. So on Friday night, I went and stayed at Jay's house, as we'd snuck out before, and his house is relatively easy to sneak out from. So night comes, and Jay's parents send us to bed at around 10 p.m., and we stay quiet until about midnight when we know Jay's parents are asleep. We then proceed to slowly open his bedroom door, down the stairs and out the back door, where we use the side gate to escape. Now Jay's house is a short walk from the town center, which we have to go through in order to get to A's house, where we are meeting A and H. Being a Friday night, the town center was alive with clubs and rowdy drunks looking for a good time. Nothing extraordinary happened on our trek through town, barring a couple of drunks approaching us and slurring utter nonsense. Then we were approached by a fairly good-looking lady trying to entice us into a local strip club, which we both found hilarious. Finally, after a 30-minute walk in the cold and dark, we finally reached A's house. We spotted A and H climbing out a window trying to be as stealthy as possible, which we also giggled at. Finally, they escaped, and we headed back towards the town center in search of 24-hour fried chicken shops. About halfway there, we spotted a hooded man lingering at the entrance of a tunnel that we had to go through. We didn't trust this, so we crossed the road to the opposite side of the loiterer. Then, out of nowhere, another hooded bloke popped out from an alleyway and called out to the initial hooded bloke, who started to walk over to him. The second man, who had popped out, asked if we had any illicit substances. We did our best to ignore him, apart from H, ever the loudmouth, who told him some guy called Peter could get him some. He replied with something unsavory as we entered the tunnel. We scolded H and continued walking, giggling and chatting. Then as me and A go on ahead, we hear Jay shout, "Oi, he's chasing us!" We turn simultaneously and see the original hooded guy giving chase about 100 feet behind. We turn and run for our lives, adrenaline pumping through our veins. We come to a split in the road and shoot left down a dark street. Everyone else continues running. I'm convinced we have lost him, so I stop to take a puff of my inhaler. I turn to check and see the guy about 50 feet back gunning for me. Oh no, I think, and run, falling as I hop the curb. I return to my feet in record time, soon catching up with the group, panting for dear life. We take a sharp turn in a park or field and run quickly to the other side. From where he was, we would have been invisible to him, but from where we were, we could see him pacing past the local park looking frantically in. I wheeze and we all stop. Then, we look up and see him enter the park and the chase resumed, and in the darkness, I smack into a low-hanging branch and almost stack it, my inhaler plummeting into the dirt. I make a grab for it and catch up with the rest of the group as we stop, finally having lost him. We make it back to A's house where me and Jay ordered a cab and say goodbye. As we were in the cab and reached the end of A's road, we see out of the tinted windows our chaser, wielding a large knife, looking frantically around, probably looking for us. We make it home and inform A and H of what we had seen and crash to bed. All I can say is that this was the first time I had truly been scared, and to this day, I have chilled at the thought of sneaking out again. It all started when I got my first computer. I was beginning to start showing some responsibility, so my parents got me a red Acer. Reminder, I was still very young. I was taught about stranger danger and all that, but I never thought anyone on the internet would try to do me harm. This all changed when I found the website Hot Games for Girls. Basically, in those days, it was a much bigger website with all different types of chat rooms, different topics, groups, and my favorite that I had never experienced before, video calls. I recently got on to check to see if there had been any changes, and luckily they removed all chat rooms, and from what I can tell, the ability to make individual profiles as well. I remember I was wearing a green tank top with stars on the right top side and loose shorts. It was a weekend and I really wanted to meet people. As an introvert, this is obviously very hard in real life, especially when you have anxiety. I joined a public chat room. It was normal for the most part, teens joking around, talking about topics they were interested in, and me trying to fit in. I got a request from a username that is far gone from my memories now, but for this story I'll call him Anon1. I clicked on it, curious to see what they had said. We had started talking, telling each other how our days were, how old we were. He said he was a 14-year-old boy that wanted to video chat. Now, as I was a self-conscious little girl, I said no because I was kind of confused on why a 14-year-old would want to talk to me. He slowly convinced me to call, though. When I did, I vividly remember the black screen on the left side and me sitting on my bed on the right. I remember saying hello, with no one saying anything back. I was about to leave when I had a message pop up. Can't talk, mic's broke. You are very beautiful. I obviously liked this comment, as gross as it might seem to me today, fully understanding the severity of the situation. The call was going good until he asked me to lift my shirt. I had started stuttering and got really nervous as he kept calling me beautiful and I should share with him. I'm so glad I didn't. After I said no for like the 5th time, he got angry with me, saying he was going to find me, hurt me, and other explicit things. Now he knew my name and the state I lived in. As soon as that was said, I slammed my laptop and put it in my closet under a ton of blankets. Please, watch your children's sites. No matter how safe they may seem, people can and will find loopholes to fulfill their disgusting needs and desires. This happened in 2015 when my husband and I were together. We've since separated, and perhaps this story will help you understand why. He and I married that year, and he always was a little off, sometimes more off than on. He served in the military and was proud of his time served, and I was proud of him too. However, he had a tendency towards visual hallucinations. I'm not sure if it's the PTSD or his familial history of mental illness, but he saw things. Usually it happened while driving. Once he saw an 8-foot spider casing the side of a barn while we were riding along the road. He asked me if I saw it. He was panicking. I didn't see it. Let me paint a picture. My mom lives deep, deep in the rural South. Further down her road are old houses people still live in and use outhouses to this day. They collect rainwater to drink, etc. Before you get to my mom's road, there's a well-kept farmhouse pretty close to the main highway, a highway with its own, haunted issues, ghost cars and such. I'm not kidding. My sister says she's seen a dozen men walking out in the fields behind that house, dressed immaculately in white suits. I promise everything I'm saying is true to the best of my knowledge. He and I pull onto the highway one night after dusk and are gaining speed as we pass that house. He's driving and I'm in the passenger side, head back, eyes closed, and the farmhouse is on the right of the car. Suddenly my husband swerves and screams. My eyes open. In a blur, I see a white human-shaped creature running at the car. Pale white, maybe gray skin, crazed, angry eyes. I don't recall that it was wearing clothing. I just remember the flash of white skin and those eyes. Human eyes, unmistakably human, with all the rage and wild contempt that only a human being could be capable of. It was running right for my door, but we passed it before it made it to the car. He screamed, asked if I had seen it. I don't know why. I can't tell you why, but I told him I hadn't. He described it to me, and I reiterated that I hadn't seen it. Later on, I confessed that I had seen it, so I'm not a complete liar, I hope. I can't let go of the feeling that it wanted to do harm to one of us. It seems I had locked eyes with it, but it was only a split second, so I wonder what my mind had filled in to make sense of the situation. Worse, much more strange things happened to my husband and me, but I can't talk about those things. I feel safe enough describing this, however. For some reason, he seemed like a beacon for the unusual and the unexplainable. He and I separated due largely to his decreasing mental health, but I'm not so sure what he's been seeing these days. But I know we both saw something that night. I'm just not sure what it was. I was about 7 or 8 years old at the time. I only vaguely remember this because I'm 18 now. My grandma and I went to town to go and buy something at this clothing store around the corner from a pharmacy. I didn't much feel like going with my grandma in the first place, but she couldn't leave me alone at home. We made our way out of the car and onto the sidewalk by the strip of shops where the pharmacy was. We entered the clothing store and my grandma started browsing while I stood and watched reluctantly. My grandma found something she liked and went to go try it on. I decided to be an irresponsible little kid and leave the store while she was trying on whatever it was she was trying on. I made my way around the corner into the pharmacy to go and look at toys in the hopes of asking my grandma to buy something when I heard a deep voice behind me say, "Hey kid, do you want to come help me with something?" I said no, of course. I may have been a naughty kid, but I didn't simply trust a stranger. He kept asking me to help him with what he called a fun test, or experiment, or whatever he called it. I kept saying no and that I wouldn't go with him, but he grabbed my hand and tried to pull me toward the exit of the building. I resisted with all my might, but it didn't work. There, of course, wasn't anyone else in the store for whatever reason, so nobody could help me. This man that was trying to take me was probably in his mid-40s and was a pretty big dude, so what happened next doesn't make much sense. My 5'2" grandma walked into that store and shouted at him to leave me alone, and he got such a big fright that he almost fell over trying to run away. He could have probably easily trampled her, but for whatever reason, she genuinely scared him. I saw it in his eyes. I just thought of this story the other day while I was thinking of my grandma and how she was my hero as a kid. She passed away in 2017 of a heart attack. I know she's in a better place now. Moral of the story is that you should always keep close to your parent or guardian because you never know what kind of people are out there. When I was around 17 years old, I was living in a really high floor in an apartment complex in southern Asia. On this particular school night, I was feeling really down to the point that I couldn't even fall asleep. So I decided to sit on my window bench seat and look down to the streets and the buildings around me while I was thinking about the things that were happening in my life. While I was looking numbed at the street, just remembering an incident that happened hours before, I started hearing movement from above me. But I didn't pay much attention to it. I mean, someone who lives in an apartment complex is more than used to hearing noises from everywhere. But as minutes went by, the noise was starting to get louder and more intense. It was weird. The noise sounded like it was coming from outside the window, which was really strange since I lived on the 28th floor. And as you can imagine, nobody really stands outside a window on the 29th floor. Then I noticed that there was a lady by the window in the building in front of me. The thing that really got my attention is that it was around 3 in the morning by that time, and the lady looked obviously very distressed. She looked like she was looking into my floor, and I was not understanding why. Then it happened. At the same time I realized what was going on, I saw it. For less than a second, I saw the distressed face of a man who had just jumped. I saw his body slowly fall 28 floors to his death. The thing that really shook me was the fact that it looked like his eyes were staring into mine, like he was surprised to find my eyes staring at him in the last moment of his life. It's been almost 8 years since this incident happened. I don't even live in that city anymore, but still to this day, I never forgot the distressed man's cold and scared eyes looking into me. I will never forget the noise of the impact of his body when it hit the ground. Needless to say that in the 2 years that I lived in that city after that scarring incident, I never sat on that window bench again. This strange thing happened to me when I was about 11 or 12 years old. My school knew it happened, a few of my peers knew, but no one really talked about it afterwards. No one understood what happened, so they didn't tell my family or mention it to me again after that night. I think it just scared them so much that they just wanted to forget it happened, as did I. So this happened when my grade was on a school trip to our country's capital city. It was over a day's drive, so the school booked a large dorm of sorts for everyone to sleep in. It was one of those buildings where when you enter, the first room is huge. First the lounge room with the television and couches and all. Then the back of the large room was the dining area with about 20 of those long, fold-out tables. Then all along the left side, both on the floor level and second story, were the bedrooms, which all contained bunk beds. You need to have an idea of the building layout for this story. So the night was relatively normal. We had dinner, played games, and went to bed. Now I had a top bunk in a room of 8 girls. We chatted and gossiped as girls that age do before going to sleep. I remember falling asleep. Darkness, no dreams, which is odd for me as I always have vivid dreams or nightmares, but this night nothing. Then I woke up, cold, wet, on a hard surface. I open my eyes and I see the stars. I was outside of the building. I sit up and look around. I've been lying in a puddle of water, directly outside of the building's entrance. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I felt so incredibly cold I knew I couldn't be. I was so confused I just sat there for a few minutes processing everything. Eventually I managed to make myself stand and walk to the door to get back inside. The door was locked. I feel panic creeping up on me and I just start to cry. For some reason I didn't want to wake people to get back inside. Maybe I was scared of getting in trouble. For about 20 minutes I tried to quietly wake up one of the girls in my room to let me in. But eventually a teacher had heard me and rushed to the door. At this point I was borderline hysterical, still trying not to make noise so as to not wake the other students. My teacher was terrified. She asked how I got out of the building, but I told her I didn't know. I just woke up out there. She woke up some of the other teachers and draped me in blankets to warm me. As I sit there, I can hear her talking to another teacher. She is saying that it would have been impossible for me to get out. The windows don't open. The keys to open all the doors are still where she hid them, exactly where they had been left. Even more concerning, there were about 6 students asleep on the couches in the living room, as there hadn't been enough beds right next to the entrance I woke up outside of. I couldn't have walked out myself without a key, nor could any other student. If they had, they would have needed to pass the students asleep there and unbolt this heavy, noisy door. The teachers spoke to those students in the morning. None of them heard anything or had been awoken by anything. One kid even admitted to being awake most of the night playing a game and hadn't seen me or anyone go outside until a teacher had retrieved me. The teachers spoke to the girls in my room. They said they too didn't see anyone come in or see me leave. The girl on the bottom of my bunk said she would have been woken up if I had, due to the noisy nature of the bunks, but I did leave that bunk somehow. I did leave that building. and I don't know how. No one did. The school told my mother what happened. I couldn't explain it any more than the school could. She never let me go on another school trip again. I'm 25 now and am yet to have another event like this. I still to this day have no idea how I got outside, but just thinking about it sends shivers up my spine. I met Price when we were both in 3rd grade. He was the quiet kid. He never talked to anyone except me unless he had to. He would get in trouble a lot, usually for small things that the teacher just got annoyed about. Price got bullied a lot for his height and his clothes. One time he backed out of a dare to lick the bathroom floor, which granted him a lot of terrible nicknames. It stuck for a while through elementary school, middle, and high school. He was a raggedy kid, not just his appearance but his attitude. He made everyone he spoke to feel like they had bathed in mud, but despite this, I took a liking to him. I always felt that I needed to protect him no matter what. It wasn't until 2 years later in 5th grade that he had invited me to his house. He told me that he had lived in a trailer, so I assumed that he was in a trailer park, but that assumption was wrong. He told me that we could hang out at his place after school. I asked him if his parents would pick us up, but he told me he lived really close so we could just walk. He led me to the woods behind our school and we started walking. We must have been walking for 10 minutes. By now, the trees overhead blocked out the afternoon sun almost completely. We finally reached his home. It was a dirty trailer in the middle of the woods. No clearing, no road, and it seemed to have sunk into the ground. Vines and shrubbery had taken it over, but the door and some windows had been cleared out. Price opened the door, and it reeked of ganja, like a freight train. I walked in, and the dirty carpet made a wet, squishy noise. Price assured me that it was probably just beer his dad had spilled. I had never been inside a trailer before, and my house was admittedly much larger than we needed it to be. It was always so clean and tidy. But I tried my best not to show any negative expression, despite the fact that I wanted to vomit. Price looked just like his dad. Long, greasy blonde hair, a permanently upturned nose, and the eyes that bulged out of his head. His father seemed to be borderline catatonic due to being so stoned and drunk. He didn't even acknowledge my presence, and Price didn't acknowledge his. He led me to a room at the back of the trailer with just a bed in it. He sat on the bed and pulled out a surprisingly pristine laptop, and I sat next to him. He showed me a video game that he made and all the coding that he's done. To my surprise, Price was a bit of a computer genius. For the next 3 years, I spent a lot of time with him in his trailer, mainly smoking and playing video games on the Xbox I bought him for his birthday in 6th grade. When high school came, we started to drift apart. I joined the football team, and he wasn't too happy with that. Price got really jealous about my other friends, and this is when things really started to go downhill. After not talking for a few months, Price texted me about a problem with his dad. I got to his trailer, and from outside I heard drunken screaming from his father. I barged into the trailer to see Price's dad beating him almost to death. I tried to stop him, but things got rough and I pushed his dad into a cabinet. He fell over and busted his head on a corner of the kitchen counter. I drove him to the hospital and left him there so we wouldn't get in any trouble for accidentally hurting him. But me and Price knew that his dad was more than just hurt. We found out that he had died in the hospital. I thought Price would be relieved to be rid of his abusive father, but he wasn't. We didn't speak after that, and I think he blames me for his father's death, but I think it's really Price's fault. In my sophomore year, 6 members of the football team went missing. The only connection they had, other than being on the same team, was that they were the only ones on the team that went to the same elementary and middle school as Price and I. This is the same day that Price went missing. A few days later, a package showed up at my front doorstep. It was in a cardboard box, sloppily sealed in duct tape. Inside was a laptop. It was Price's laptop. I opened it up and it was unlocked and already turned on. On the screen was what appeared to be a title screen for a video game. I couldn't click out of it. I couldn't access Task Manager, I couldn't even turn the computer off. All I could do was click the red button in the middle of the screen that read Start in big bold letters. The game played a bit like Slender Man. If you're not familiar with it, it's a game where you roam the woods searching for pages of a notebook while being chased by a demon in a suit. Except the game Price made was in the high school. In fact, it was an exact replica of the school. And I wasn't being chased by anything to my knowledge, although I constantly felt like I was being watched. I found the first item. It was a well-drawn piece of a photo that had been torn off. It appeared to be an arm. A prompt in the upper right corner of the screen read, 1/6 pieces found. The game took me about 20 minutes to finish. Each piece I found was a different body part. 2 legs, 2 arms, a torso, and lower body. I noticed that in the picture with the lower body, the genitals had been ripped off. A new prompt told me to go out to the football field and find the final piece. Lying in the middle of the field was the last piece of the picture. It was the head of one of the missing football players. I put the pieces together and I stared at the completed picture. The picture wasn't drawn. It was a real picture that Price had imported into the game. The whole picture showed a mosaic of different body parts ripped from each missing player that had been sewn together. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. All of a sudden, the game closed out, and then the screen showed a picture of me in my room huddled over my desk. The picture had been taken from outside my window. Had Price been stalking me? My breath quaked. I was sitting so still for so long that my back started to hurt. So while I figured out what I should do about this information that had been forced upon me, I leaned back in my chair. One last terrifying realization settled on my shoulders. When I leaned back in my chair, the me that was in the picture leaned back as well. It's not a picture, I thought to myself. It was a live feed from outside my window. I frantically looked outside, but it was too dark to see anything. I was going to go out and try to see where the camera was, but when I looked back at the computer, it just read, no signal. It's now my senior year in college. The police never found Price or any of the football players. The mosaic of limbs was found right in the middle of the football field where it had been in the video game. I never told anyone about the game or the live feed from outside my window. Every year, 3 days after the anniversary of Price's disappearance, I get a package in the mail. It's always a laptop with a live video feed of me in my bedroom. They have followed me wherever I move to. I have grown attached to the packages. I have kept each laptop. None of them work except for the live feed, so I've decided to hang each one on my wall. I never look for the camera. I just sit and smile, knowing that that raggedy kid is still watching over me. Today is the anniversary of his disappearance, so should I expect another laptop in the mail soon? And when I get it, I will repeat my yearly tradition of watching the live feed. I don't feel guilty about what I did. It serves them right for bullying my best friend.
"30 hours ago, I hopped on a late-night flight from New York heading to Los Angeles. After boarding, I saw that I had an entire row to myself. Takeoff passed without incident, and soon I was stretched out for a nap across the row. I slept for a few hours, I don't know how long, but I woke up to some severe turbulence. It's possible that the lights in the cabin went out for a moment, but I was so disoriented that it's hard to say. I checked my phone to see that it was 4:03 a.m., which I figured gave me about an hour until we landed. When I looked out my window, I was shocked to see nothing but wide open ocean. My jaw dropped. There's obviously no ocean between New York and Los Angeles. I hit the button to call the flight attendant and spent the next few minutes racking my brain for a lake that could have been possibly big enough to explain what I was seeing. I jumped when the attendant flipped off the light. She was grinning from ear to ear, and tears were pouring down her cheeks. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked. I froze for a moment at her reaction, before deciding to just ask my question. "Where are we? Why does it look like we're flying over an ocean?" She wiped her cheeks to clear the tears, still grinning wildly. "Sir, we'll be landing in about an hour." Okay, thank you," I said. After she left, I checked the clock on my phone again. 4:03 a.m. blinked back at me. It hadn't changed. I had to have been waiting with my call light on for at least 5 minutes. How was it possible that it hadn't changed at all? I opened up my laptop and saw that it too displayed 4:03 a.m. I pulled out my phone, started a stopwatch in the app, and spent the next 2 hours looking back and forth between the clocks, waiting for them to change. They never did. I tapped the shoulder of an older woman sitting in the row ahead of me. She looked back, an annoyed expression across her face. "Yes?" she asked. "Do you know how long until we land?" I asked. She narrowed her eyes. "That flight attendant said it would be about another hour." I shook my head in confusion. "That flight attendant? We talked almost 2 hours ago. We should have landed already." She stared at me as if I was crazy. I was going to continue trying to convince her, but I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun to see a male flight attendant grinning down at me, tears pinging off his cheeks onto my shoulder. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to calm down, or I'll be calling the captain." I told him that wouldn't be necessary and sat back. He removed his hand and stepped away. The flight attendants continued to stop by every few hours offering meals. My stopwatch continued to tick up, and is now telling me that I've been on this plane for more than 30 hours. I've explored all of coach and tried talking to some other passengers, but they've all told me that they're expecting to land in an hour or so. Around 3 hours back, I tried getting into first class. I made it past the curtain, but was escorted back by 2 grinning flight attendants. Their grip on my arms were like iron. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is on," one said. "Please remain in your seat with your buckle fastened. We'll be landing in about an hour." I had just about given up hope when a woman came down the aisle dressed in a business suit. She didn't look at me or slow down, but she dropped a piece of paper onto my tray as she made her way to the bathrooms at the back of the plane. I shot a look around before unrolling it. It said, "Are you stuck too?" I pulled out a pen and wrote, "Yes, it's been 30 hours." I folded the scrap of paper up and set it on the tray closest to the aisle. She left the bathroom and picked it up as she passed. It's been 20 minutes since then. I don't know why, but I don't think the flight attendants would like it if they knew we were talking. It doesn't matter. I have to do something. I'll update you all on my channel with whatever happens next.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon. In all my years of law enforcement, 2 things have never ceased to amaze me. Number 1, there are no laws a criminal will not stoop to in order to come out on top. And number 2, even the most seemingly peaceful situations have the potential to explode into violence. My most recent example of this is February of 2020, right before the Rona hit, when I was working on a pet recovery PI job. I served almost 20 years at the Oakland PD, and I've been working private investigations for the last 3. But if you think being a PI was a step down in intensity from actual police work, you'd be wrong. But don't worry, because that'd make 2 of us. I thought being a PI would be an easy way to pad my bank account so I'd still have something left over for the kids. Turns out, it's all the grind of a detective's job, and the perps are even less afraid to point a gun at you. But work is work, so I stuck with it. Anyway, back to the pet recovery job, something that became my bread and butter for a few months back in 2019 and 2020. You might be surprised how willing people were to steal each other's dogs, and even weirder was how a rare crime like dog napping experienced a huge spike. It was mainly thoroughbred pups being stolen, but there were definitely a few cases where a mutt was passed off as a pedigree, and that basically meant that no dog was safe. So, I get a call from this nice, polite, elderly couple who tell me their brand new French bulldog pup had been stolen. If an animal gets stolen, finding them is easy, and it's usually an issue that uniformed cops can deal with. If not, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. And due to the large amount of dog nappings, us private investigators got to soak up the overflow. So, I take down all the details of the robbery, get a photo of the dog, then hit up the likes of Facebook Marketplace to see if there are any French bulldog pups for sale. I didn't get one right away, but about a week later, I see a listing for a 1-year-old French bulldog pup at some rock-bottom price. Now, I'd worked dog nappings before, so I was already somewhat familiar with the dog napper's mindset. They'll always give out some terrible excuse as to why they're selling, like how they just can't afford to feed the dog anymore, or that they're moving to an apartment that doesn't allow animals. But then, when you ask to meet in a public place, say a dog park, they suddenly can become very insistent that the exchange takes place at a private residence or in a suspiciously private location. And bingo, when I ask the seller to meet at a nearby dog park, they give me some excuse about being disabled and ask me to meet them at their home. I was 90% sure at this point that this was my guy, and my usual game plan was just to roll up and explain that it was either me or cops in cuffs. This was usually all it took. After all, people who prey on tiny dogs and elderly couples tend not to be so brave or tough. Anyway, later that day I roll up to the guy's house, knock on the door, and tell him that I'm there for the dog when he opens up. He brings the dog out on a leash, and I can tell right away that it's the exact same dog I'm looking for. It's gray with white patches, these bright green eyes, just about the cutest looking thing you'd ever seen. The guy's right in the middle of apologizing for having lost the dog's vax papers while assuring me it's had its shots, when I straight up just say the dog's name. The guy had been calling him some other name, and I noticed the dog didn't seem to be responding to it. But when I called it Oscar, what its owner's been calling it for the first year of its life, the dog literally perks up and cocks its head as if to say, "Do I know you, sir?" Immediately, the dog napper senses something's wrong, but at the same time, he's totally committed to making the sale. So instead of just telling me to get lost and going back inside, he responds by saying, "You want the dog or not, man?" I tell him no, and I know a couple of old folks who'd be very interested in being united with their beloved Oscar. It was a total bluff, like I said. I was only 90% sure it was the dog I was looking for, maybe only 95% after the dog responded to its name. But then came what I can only describe as an impressively convincing performance from the dog napper in question. The guy was completely indignant, told me he knew what I was implying, and that he had the paperwork to prove it was his dog. If I just wait a minute, he'd go fetch it, and then I'd owe him an apology. It got to the point where I really started to doubt myself. Anyone else would have given up the act by this point. But here was this guy, throwing my bluff right back at me with finesse, to the point that I actually just stood there like an idiot, waiting for him to bring back some papers that didn't exist in the first place. A minute later, he reemerges, and I have expected him to actually have the papers. But no, I instinctively reacted as he swung at me, and in the millisecond that his fist flew past my face, I saw he had something shiny in his hand. I kept on backing up, hand moving toward my holster, and the next thing I know, he's running back into his house as I have my pistol pointed at him. If I'd have been an inch closer to that guy's door, I'd have been a dead man. I called it in, and since I still had a few connections to the department, I managed to get a squad car out to me pretty fast. The guy had like 25 dogs in the back room of his place, all stolen, all kept in some of the most inhumane conditions imaginable. What I thought was going to be an afternoon's work turned out to be a huge thing, with animal welfare and a few CSP officers joining the circus of vehicles parked outside the house. Oscar was eventually returned to his owners, and the perp eventually agreed to a plea deal which involved returning the rest of the dogs to their owners. It didn't end well for all of them, though. Some of the dogs had already been sold on, so not all of them were able to be returned. The impact it had on people is horrendous too. Like, if you think people get upset over a stolen TV, just imagine how they get when they actually love the thing that's being stolen. Almost makes you feel bad taking people's money when it works out like that, but you gotta put food on the table somehow. It just helps when doing the right thing is what brings home the bacon. I've been meaning to send you my brother's story for a while now, but writing this turned out to be much harder than I first thought. I lost my brother a few years back. He was a cop for most of his life, but took an early medical retirement after being stabbed almost 20 times while on a traffic stop. According to him, the guy played drunk as a skunk so he could get close enough to pull his knife, and then managed to almost turn my brother into a pincushion before he could defend himself. I don't think he ever really had to work again, but he also wasn't ready to completely retire, aged just 41, so he took up private investigator work with a small firm outside Sacramento. Not exactly adrenaline-fueled run-and-gun stuff, but it was enough to feather his nest egg while keeping idle hands from the devil's work. Anyway, the last job he ever took was something pretty close to his heart. According to his old boss, the company had been tasked with tracking down a former cop, one who had a bizarrely similar story to my brother's. He too had been handed an early medical retirement after a traffic stop gone wrong, but the incident was considerably worse than the one experienced by my brother. Not only had this guy lost his patrol partner in the shootout that followed, he coded multiple times from his own wounds that left him with a complex form of post-traumatic stress disorder. He'd gone through an identical therapy program to my brother. It just hadn't worked for him like it worked for Marty. I think that's what affected Marty so greatly about it. How in his mind it could have just as easily been him losing his mind and vanishing, all the while scaring the life out of his family in the process. So, from what I heard, Marty spent a lot of time or so tracking the guy down. How in God's name he managed it when law enforcement had been unable to, I'm not quite sure, but he must have gone out to have a face-to-face with the guy around September, because that's around the time that he stopped answering his phone. Marty used to get pretty absorbed in his work, so it wasn't all that unusual not to hear from him for a few days at a time. Back when my sister-in-law called to tell us that he hadn't reached out to her either, that was when we started to worry. The guy he was looking for might have gone off the grid, but Marty always had his cell on him while he was working. All it took for the cops to find him was to ping his phone. Then bingo, they found his body. Marty had been killed by a rigged shotgun shell that someone had strung up in a tree. The cops think it was the guy he was looking for, but it could have just as easily been someone with him. They'd rigged their dirty redneck shack with booby traps, and all over the surrounding woods, too. It's actually something of a miracle that Marty went up there on his own. A lot more lives might have been lost otherwise. That's how I rationalize it to myself anyways. That even in death he was out there saving lives and protecting people. I just don't get what would drive someone to booby-trap their home like that. Like, what are you so scared of that you need to rig shotgun shells to tripwires or whatever he was doing? As far as I know, he hadn't actually done anything wrong, so the cops weren't looking for him outside of being listed as a missing person. I totally get that he was suffering with mental health problems and that he wasn't exactly behaving in a rational way. But what if he wasn't as crazy as people were making him out to be? What if he was actually being pursued by people that warranted such a level of defense and precaution? Look, I'm not excusing the role the guy played in the death of my brother, but After all the sadness and anger and hatred has passed, all I have left is unanswered questions. Obviously, the guy caught a charge for death by reckless endangerment, but the cops think he either heard the shell going off or he found Marty's body, because he got out of that area not long after. I know Marty was dealing with something big. He wouldn't have been so obsessed with the case otherwise. He had a rough idea of the guy's location. Why not just pass that on to the family? And this is in the age of drone technology too, something I know Marty was a fan of. So why bother hiking all the way out there when he could have just gotten a few drone pictures? Marty was easily the toughest person I ever knew, and he was like that ever since we were kids. He was crazy brave, but he was crazy smart too. And I don't believe he'd ever put himself at risk unless he absolutely had to. The whole thing just doesn't sit right with me, and maybe it's just the way the grief manifests now, but I can't help but think that something much darker was going on than just some traumatized ex-cop. Worst thing is, I don't think any of us are going to get any solid answers until they catch the guy, which between you and me could well be never. I'm sorry this doesn't have some grand conclusion or whatever. Lord knows I wish it did too. But to me, this is a horror that I've learned to live with on a daily basis. That my brother is gone, and there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it at all. And of all the weird jobs I've worked as a private investigator, there's one that tops the list when it comes to weird, creepy calls. I knew right away that it wasn't going to be your average Monday as soon as the client mentioned an old clock. It had been in the client's family for a few generations and was obviously a very important heirloom, so the client wanted to know more about it. Only trouble was, they had no idea where to start, so their logic was, why struggle as amateurs when we can pay a professional? Thankfully, I rely on that kind of thinking to keep my lights on, so even though the job was a little out of left field, I was grateful for the work. The shift from professional to personal curiosity occurred when I actually laid eyes on the thing for the first time. I've never been into antiques or watches or anything like that. Cars have always been more my thing, but let me tell you, before we knew anything about it, that old clock was something to behold. It was about the same size as a toaster, perhaps not too small, not too big, but the work that had been put into it was seriously breathtaking. It looked as old as it was pretty, too. I'm talking ancient in appearance, and even though the owner said it was made in the 1800s, it looked way, way older, like it might fall apart in your hands. But in spite of that, it was actually surprisingly sturdy and seemed to be made of a pale kind of wood, maybe a kind of maple that had been treated with something to make it almost bright white. I couldn't even begin to describe how incredibly intricate the inlay of the clock face was, with all this ivory and pearl, or rather, I assumed was ivory and pearl. The owner mentioned that it might have come from over in Europe around the same time their family did. They were German and Czech. And since I factored lab fees into my pricing package, I just took the old clock to my lab guy to run a few tests on it. That kind of analysis is very expensive, but my guy told me that with the tests he'd be running, he'd be able to tell me exactly where the wood came from, along with a rough idea of when it was cut down. It's pretty impressive, right? And he says he can do all that from just a scraping of the wood. So much it won't affect the integrity of the clock's facade. It's an incredibly technological method with incredibly accurate results, but boy does it take time. So after my guy got a sample of the wood, he said that he'd get back to me probably in about a week. He calls me up 2 days later and tells me that it's not wood at all. It's bone. Human bone. Not just that. Almost every single part of the clock consisted of some variety of human anatomy. Remember the ivory and pearl I was telling you about earlier? Teeth. Human teeth. with some of the more delicate parts of the clock being made of a combo of human hair and fingernail fibers. Now, this put me in the unenviable position of having to tell the client that I was going to call the cops. There's a criminality clause in all my contracts, meaning that if some aspect of my work leans on to the wrong side of the law, I have the right to absolve myself of all criminal responsibility by going directly to the police to fill them in on what's going on. I've only ever had to do that once before, and it involved a case that's frankly not fit for discussion here. But through an investigation, I'd basically made myself an accessory to kidnap and murder, and let me tell you, that was a scary time for me. Anyway, I informed the client of my intentions, and they were fine with it. They were just as shocked as I was to hear that the clock's casing was made of human bone. Compressed human bone, I should add. Looked a lot different than just regular old ribs or wing bones, so naturally they were keen to absolve themselves of any guilt too. After that, it was just a case of heading down to the local PD to turn the clock in, because at that point, it was less of a case of where the clock came from and more who it came from. Ironically, the clock got sent right back to my lab buddy's place of work because he texted me saying, "Guess who's reunited with your bone clock?" This gave us something of a chuckle, but it was also one heck of a boon. If the cops were intent on keeping us in the dark, we'd have a way of knowing what was going on. A few days later, I get a call from my lab guy saying all the tests have been run, and there's no DNA to match any profile at the CODIS or at the National DNA Index System. In fact, the guys at the lab figured whoever the bones had belonged to had died before America was even a country. So, unless my client had a time machine, it was safe to say that they were innocent of any foul play. After that, the cops were at something of a crossroads. Apparently, they could have gone ahead with charges, something about an old federal statute regulating the transportation of human tissues, but since there didn't seem to be any ill will or shadiness with my client, no charges were filed. But then it was a case of what to do with the remains, and officially speaking, my client was basically this dead person's legal guardian. They had to decide whether to just take the clock home again, or if they wanted the remains cremated and interred as a John Doe at a nearby cemetery. Personally, there was definitely a time in my life when I'd have thought, forget it. Take the clock home and put it on eBay for antiques. Something like that has to exist, right? After all, human remains are not, and at the risk of sounding like Indiana Jones, that thing really should have been in some kind of museum or something. But the way my client saw it, either the bones belonged to an ancestor of theirs, in which case they should be laid to rest, or the bones weren't anything to do with the family, in which case they still deserved to be laid to rest. I think that was most definitely the right decision. All greed aside, I wouldn't want my remains passed around and ogled at as some piece of curios. So that was that. The bone clock was cremated and interred under the name John Doe, and for all intents and purposes, the case was solved. The only thing that's left to wonder is how the heck the bone clock was created in the first place. Honestly, I'm hoping it was some dying clockmaker's last wish, to have his body refashioned into something that'd last for 3 or 4 lifetimes. And if that was the case, he sure did get his wish, for a while anyway. But then there's the much weirder thoughts that creep in when I let my mind take over. Because what if this guy wasn't dying when they took his bones? What if the whole thing was to turn a perfectly healthy person into a godforsaken clock? Maybe as a punishment. Maybe it was like a ritual or something that was performed against their will. I'd rather not consider the second option. In fact, I try not to think about the bone clock too much at all, because every time I do, that same old thought creeps into my head. How the chimes that clock must have made at some point were less like chimes and more like screams. My parents hired a private eye to track down my sister, who'd run off with her much older boyfriend. Turned out to be one of the biggest mistakes they'd ever made. She was just 18 at the time, legally an adult, so as much as my mom and dad begged the cops to bring her home, there wasn't a darn thing that they could do about it. So, that's where the PI came into it. I was pretty young at the time this all went down, so my only real memory of the whole thing was when the cops showed up on our doorstep and my mom started wailing when they gave her the news. The private investigator pulled up to the apartment he thought my sister and her boyfriend were at. He was supposed to just contact our parents once he'd done this, but the cops figured he wanted to make a positive ID, so he walks right up to the room and knocks on the door. No one knows exactly what happened next. Even after watching the security camera footage, the cops couldn't quite tell who drew or shot first. But someone did, and once it started, that was it. My sister's boyfriend had a revolver, but the private investigator had 17 rounds in his clips, so 6 bullets went one way, but 17 went the other. When it was over, the PI was dead, the boyfriend was dead, and the cops found my sister in the bathroom. She'd taken one in the arm and one in the neck. She lasted until the hospital, but coded when they were trying to stabilize her. Not long after that, I woke up to the sound of my mom screaming with the blue and red flashing lights outside. I had a thing about emergency lights for a long time after that, and they still give me a little zap of anxiety whenever I see them, because I always think that wherever they're going, there's someone screaming, just like my mom did. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Werner, I sincerely hope this email finds you well, but I'm afraid I have some bad news regarding the disappearance of your daughter. As per my last email, and thanks to the information you've already accumulated, I tracked Wendy down to Washoe County, Nevada. It seems you were correct in your assumption that she is traveling with others, although Topeka PD may have been correct in their assertion that she is in their company of her own free will. I know you firmly insisted on multiple occasions that your daughter was kidnapped, but I'm not ruling out that her previous statement wasn't coerced or made under duress. But some further details have come to light that you may wish to consider before continuing your efforts to bring Wendy back home. I understand that the past year has been very upsetting for you, and that all you desire is your daughter returned to you. But at this stage of the investigation, I think the priority should be minimizing the distress of all parties. So, while this is not strictly a plea to discontinue the investigation, I implore you to consider, for the sake of your collective sanity. Based on communications with the Topeka Police Department, I managed to determine both the description of the vehicle she was traveling in, as well as those of her companions. After that, it was simply a case of tracking her phone's cell data until I had a rough idea of where she was, which turned out to be a small town named Sutcliffe on the western shores of Pyramid Lake. I understand that I'm not the first private investigator that you've employed, and that Wendy had reacted poorly to them in the past, so I made sure not to reveal my presence until it was absolutely necessary. I had the vehicles in sight, a girl matching Wendy's rough description. All I had to do was make a positive identification. I even had that recent picture you provided me with, just as a visual reference for when contact finally occurred, and the girl in question was even wearing the same hiking boots that Wendy left Ohio with, and I was 99% sure it was her. But when I tried to make contact, I began to notice certain anomalies. Wendy doesn't respond to her name anymore, and doesn't seem to be an act of defiance. In my experience, it takes a long time, sometimes years, for someone to rewire their brain when it comes to their birth name. So for Wendy to be visibly confused when I called her birth name, that's something I've never experienced before. It's worth noting that she and her companions insisted that her name was Chantiko. I'm unsure if this name has any significance to you, but the choice might provide an insight into her thought process and motivations, or that of her companions. As far as I can tell, the name is Central American of origin, but that is pure speculation on my part, as I am certainly no linguistics expert. He also told me that Wendy's height was just above 5'1", but the girl I spoke to wasn't an inch below 5'5" or 5'6". My own daughter's 5'6", and Wendy now appears to be of very similar height. I can assure you that this was not due to any kind of misidentification on my part, nor was Wendy wearing any kind of height-elevating hairstyle or footwear. She was wearing the same hiking boots she left Ohio with. There are only a handful of explanations for how this could be the case, and some are considerably more feasible than others, but instead of speculating, I think I'd be more prudent of me to respect the limits of my own knowledge as not to further confuse the investigation. As per our communication on May 24th, 2013, you told me Wendy's eyes were blue. Yet she seems to have suffered some kind of optical infection, as the iris and pupil of her right eye had turned black. I understand there are contact lenses you can buy that achieve a similar effect, so this might not be anything to worry about. It's also possible that her right pupil was extremely dilated during the interaction, which gave me the impression her eye had changed color. I'm not an optometrist, so I'm not trying to draw any conclusions from that. I only mentioned it in case it becomes pertinent later on. You also informed me that Wendy could be identified by the small pink heart-shaped tattoo on her wrist. In the end, this is the only real way of me knowing it was the same girl. She had the tattoo covered up with a bandage, but whether or not the tattoo is in the process of removal or she's simply covering it up, I'm not sure. I'd have made a solid ID attempt to gain visual of the tattoo, but like you warned me, my attempt at contact was immediately met with hostile response. As such, contact was broken immediately and I removed myself to a safe, observational distance. The last I saw of Wendy and her group, they were heading up into the mountains, on the roads towards Granite Peak. They may still be in Nevada, but there's just likely a chance that they cross state lines into California following their departure from Sutcliffe. If you wish to continue your investigation, you're obviously free to do so, but I'm afraid it will be without my participation. Frankly, I don't believe this is a case that I'm qualified to be involved in, although exactly whose expertise you'd wish to seek, I'm afraid I can't say. It seems impossible to even consider, but it seems on top of the drastic emotional changes Wendy has endured, that there have been some sort of physical changes too. There might well be rational explanations for this, but as I previously stated, they are not explanations I feel I'm qualified to give. Mr. and Mrs. Werner, in all my years of law enforcement and detective work, I've only ever come across 2 cases that have truly, genuinely frightened me, and this is one of them. I understand that all you want is to have Wendy home again, and I say this not to alarm you, but to give you a realistic expectation of what might occur in the future. But I think you're overestimating just how much of Wendy you'd be getting back. This is the first time in my investigative career that I have ever had to do this, and please believe that I do so with a heavy heart. But I implore you to stop looking for Wendy. I fear you're chasing answers that few people are equipped to deal with, and having gotten to know you both personally over the past few months, it pains me to think that you're trying to endure the unendurable. Good luck, and I hope you both find peace in the future. Apologetically yours, Robert Clancy, Senior Associate, Taylor Payton Investigations, Kansas City, Missouri. In the early hours of June 7th, 1998, a brutal home invasion in Barberton, Ohio sent shockwaves across Middle America. 58-year-old Judy Johnson and her grandniece, 6-year-old Brooke Sutton, had been attacked by the violent intruder while they'd been sleeping. Judy had been sleeping on the TV room couch at the time, allowing the intruder to ambush her with a horrifyingly bloodthirsty attack. It only ceased once he'd strangled the life out of her. But in turn, the commotion had woken up 6-year-old Brooke, who was nothing short of traumatized by what she saw. I got out of bed, went to the kitchen,
Then when I looked, I saw that there was a guy in the kitchen, Brooke later said. But it scared me, so I ran back to the bedroom. Brooke then said that she hid under her duvet, pretending to be asleep, but her ruse didn't save her from the evil that had forced its way into her home that night. The mysterious intruder entered the bedroom and struck Brooke in the face. Once she was unconscious, Brooke was continually beaten, suffering a small cut to her throat in the process. This is believed to be from her attacker intending to kill her, yet going through a change of heart at the very final moment. By some miracle, Brooke survived an attack so horrendous that she'd had to compartmentalize it in order to preserve her mental health. Essentially, she had no memory of the attack, and awoke around 7 hours after the attack to discover that her great-aunt's lifeless corpse was still laying on the couch where she'd been sleeping. Not knowing what to do, Brooke telephoned a neighbor, leaving the following message on one of their answering machines. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but my grandma died, and I need somebody to get my mom for me. I'm all alone. Somebody killed my grandma. Now please, would you get a hold of me as soon as you can? Bye." Brooke then walked to the home of neighbor Tanya Brazel, who told the bruised and bloodied child to wait on the porch for around 45 minutes until she was free to drive her home. When she did, she too was greeted by a scene of grotesque violence. When the police arrived at the scene, they immediately began questioning Brooke, and to their horror, when they asked the young girl if she had any idea who her attacker might be, she answered in the affirmative. Brooke said her great-aunt's killer looked like Uncle Clarence, a reference to Judy Johnson's 35-year-old son-in-law, Clarence Elkins. She repeated the claim on numerous occasions, even claiming that her attacker sounded like Clarence, yet years later, she admitted that she wasn't so sure. "I just wasn't sure if it was Uncle Clarence or not," Brooke said, "but I was too afraid to say anything." Based on her testimony, Clarence Elkins was arrested as the primary suspect in the murder of his own mother-in-law. At his trial, the state's prosecuting attorney argued that Clarence murdered his mother-in-law after her repeated interference in his marriage to her daughter, Melinda. Once again, the testimony of 6-year-old Brooke was used to identify Clarence as the attacker, and prosecutors hammered the looks like him, sounds like him angle until the jury was dead set on a conviction. As a result, Clarence Elkins was convicted on a plethora of charges in June of 1999 and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms by a judge who has absolutely no prior experience with murder trials. Somehow, the jury had completely overlooked the fact that the prosecution's star witness was a 6-year-old child. They'd also overlooked the complete lack of forensic evidence linking Clarence to the crime scene. In fact, hairs were found on Judy's body that were determined to be the killer's. However, the prospect of them being Clarence's was completely ruled out after a DNA test came back negative. The jury also seemed to ignore the fact that Clarence had an airtight alibi. He told police that on the night of the murder, he'd been drinking with friends before returning home at around 2:30 a.m., something that both his friends and his wife Melinda confirmed. Given that the murder occurred between the hours of 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., this basically ruled Clarence out as the murderer. Yet the prosecution weaved such a compelling argument that the jury ignored substantial amounts of evidence in favor of a scandalous but questionable narrative. To Clarence and Melinda Elkins, it was a waking nightmare. Each knew Clarence was innocent and that a horrendous miscarriage of justice had occurred. But knowing the truth was one thing and proving it before the law was another thing entirely. Following the conviction, Clarence and Melinda began their own investigation into Judy Johnson's murder and went on to hire a private investigator by the name of Martin Yant. Martin had gained something of a reputation for assisting with the exonerations of numerous wrongfully convicted defendants, and the Elkins hoped he could do the same for Clarence. Over the course of their own private investigation, the Elkins uncovered evidence that proved beyond all doubt that Clarence was innocent of the murder. This new evidence healed the fractures in the Johnson and Elkins families, which had been bitterly divided since the day of the conviction. 3 years after the original trial,
Brooke Sutton filed an official statement saying that it couldn't have been Clarence. The person that hurt me and Mima had brown eyes and Clarence has blue eyes. The prosecution's prime piece of evidence was now utterly defunct, yet the families were horrified when their request for an appeal was denied. Despite the overwhelming evidence of Clarence's innocence, the presiding judge was convinced that the family's reconciliation had prompted them to coach Brooke into reversing her testimony, and on those grounds, he refused to allow a retrial. Clarence and Melinda were left shell-shocked by the development, but their determination was unwavering, and even as those around them were left despondent by the decision, the couple continued to work towards the justice they so richly deserved. Following the failed appeal, and on the advice of the private investigator Martin Yant, the Elkins commenced a lengthy legal battle that would see him win the right to access the DNA evidence recovered from the crime scene. Melinda Elkins then brought the samples to a DNA laboratory in Texas, who tested them out at half their normal asking price of $25,000. These tests conclusively excluded Clarence from the crime scene, as not a single strand recovered from the scene matched his own. However, in another nauseating bureaucratic blunder, Judge Judy Hunter ruled that because a jury convicted him without DNA evidence, they would have convicted him even if it didn't match. Essentially, Clarence would only be exonerated if the actual killer was identified and apprehended. For all intents and purposes, Melinda Elkins has been given a task that no one should have to undertake. She was faced with solving the murder of her own mother. Many others might find it a task too grim to bear, but Melinda Elkins was resolute. She knew in her heart of hearts that her husband was innocent, and that their perseverance would one day pay off. Besides, it was now not simply a case of clearing Clarence's name. She had to find the monster that murdered her mother. Melinda visited her initial investigation into the murder, re-questioning Brooke regarding the events of that morning. It was around then that Brooke mentioned her interaction with Tanya Brazel, the neighbor whose home she'd wandered up to in her grief-stricken days. Tanya had made Brooke wait on the porch for almost 45 minutes before finally driving her home, and this is after the little girl had made it clear that there had been a murder. Tanya's excuse was that she had to finish cooking breakfast for her kids, and that there was no point in just dropping everything if Judy Johnson was beyond saving. This obviously threw a giant red flag for Melinda Elkins, who was determined to get to the bottom of why Tanya was so seemingly unshaken by the arrival of a bruised and bloodied 6-year-old on her doorstep. Melinda discovered that despite Tanya living alone with her 3 children, she had a common-law marriage with a person named Earl Mann. Born in Melbourne, Florida, Earl had a history of committing violent robberies and had previously been convicted of child abuse. Tanya apparently said that she wanted nothing to do with Earl, and that she hadn't heard from him in years, but Melinda kept on digging. She eventually discovered that Earl was an ex-con and not only had been convicted of murder, but he had been released from prison just 2 days before her mother was killed. Melinda set about tracking Earl down and learned he was incarcerated at the Mansfield Correctional Facility, about 60 miles southwest of Cleveland, the exact same prison where Clarence was serving his own sentence. Melinda promptly got in touch with her husband and issued him with a very unusual mission. He needed to steal one of Earl Mann's possessions, more specifically, something which would have his DNA on it. Clarence took his time observing Earl's habits and behaviors, and initially planned to swipe an item of his clothing from the prison laundry. But Clarence quickly noticed something about Earl, something which could well mean the answer to his prayers. Every time he was in the exercise yard, without fail, Earl smoked cigarettes. Clarence knew there was an excellent chance that Earl's saliva would leave traces of DNA on the butts of his cigarettes, but finding them among the scores of others and swiping one without raising any suspicion, that was another thing entirely. One day, out in the exercise yard, Clarence nonchalantly wandered in Earl's direction as he puffed away on his smoke. Once he was nearing the end of it, Clarence watched him like a hawk, fixated on the butt that Earl had dropped into the dirt. Then, as the convicted murderer walked away, Clarence moved into the position, then pretended to tie his shoelaces as he snatched up the still warm butt. Clarence passed the cigarette butt to the family's attorney, who in turn sent it away for testing, and the results that came back changed everything. It was a match, proving once and for all that Clarence Elkins was innocent of his mother-in-law's murder. Following Earl Mann's arrest, police re-questioned his common-law wife, Tanya Brazel, and were particularly interested in why she'd taken so long to respond to the traumatized young Brooke. It turned out she'd not just been busy with breakfast, because Earl Mann had been in the house that morning when Brooke came looking for help. Tanya told the police that, as much as she wanted to call 911, Earl threatened her with violence if she even let little Brooke inside the house. Tanya later claimed that the only reason she'd remained silent regarding her husband's suspicious behavior was because Brooke had named her Uncle Clarence as the killer. Yet despite arguably being an accessory to murder, Tanya was never charged with any crime. Unbelievably, even in the face of compelling DNA evidence, the local district attorney refused to release Clarence Elkins from prison. A press conference was held, with high-ranking law enforcement officials lambasting the terrible miscarriage of justice. Media coverage continued to generate public outrage, until finally, on December 15th of 2005, Clarence Elkins was officially declared innocent before being released from prison shortly afterward. 3 years later, Earl Mann pled guilty to charges of aggravated murder in the death of Judy Johnson. He was sentenced to 55 years to life in prison and will not be eligible for parole until he's 92 years old. Clarence Elkins received compensation from the state of Ohio to the tune of just over $1 million, but later sued the local Barberton Police Department, securing an additional $5 million in restitution. Sadly, his marriage to Melinda didn't survive their ordeal, and they divorced in September of 2006, less than a year after his release. However, it should be noted that the split was a very amicable one, and that the pair remain close friends to this day. Frankly, it's a miracle that they stayed together at all after one was accused of killing the other's mother, and the fact that Melinda basically solved her own mother's murder is a testament to her strength of character. We can only hope that both Melinda and Clarence have found the peace and the justice that they've so richly deserved. Born in Chicago on August 25th of 1965, Mia Catherine Zapata showed a passion for music from a very early age. Originally influenced by jazz and R&B singers such as Billie Holiday, Ray Charles, and Sam Cooke, Mia would go on to be possessed by a very different kind of music, punk rock. In 1984, Mia enrolled at a liberal arts college in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and it's here that she and 3 of her close friends started a band they called The Gits. Within no time, The Gits had developed a loyal following amidst the local underground punk scene, and the band saw such success that they decided to pursue their musical ambitions full-time. In late 1989, The Gits relocated to Seattle, Washington to engage in the city's burgeoning grunge scene, with fellow musicians saying that their approach warranted immediate respect and interest. Mia herself was described as an extraordinarily vibrant and talented girl who had a way of bringing people of different interests and backgrounds together. For a while, it seemed as though the Gits were destined for great things, as their music had drawn the interest of grunge titans such as Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. But their dreams were violently cut short one night, in an incident that would send shockwaves through the Pacific Northwest, as well as the wider musical community. On the night of July 7th, 1993, Mia had been drinking at the Comet Tavern in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. She had been renting a studio apartment in the basement of a nearby tenement building, and the Comet was just a block away, so after stumbling back home, she briefly stopped in to see a friend who lived up on the second floor. This was the last time she was ever seen alive. A few hours later, Mia's body was found near the intersection of 24th Avenue and South Washington Street in Seattle's Central District. She had been beaten, violated, and strangled, with her time of death said to be around 2:15 a.m. Since she had no ID on her at the time, EMTs had no idea who she was. It was only when being examined by the coroner that Mia was recognized, and that was only down to him being a huge fan of her work. The coroner had actually been to see the Gits in concert just a few months prior. Then there was Mia, lying on an autopsy table, cold to the touch. Mia's murder stunned the Seattle musical community, with some saying that an overarching atmosphere of fear and defeat lingered following her death. The Seattle Times was quoted as saying that the Seattle scene has lost its sense of invincibility, with one reporter calling the incident a reality check. We were all really strong, outspoken, hard-hitting women, and we refused to see ourselves as victims, a close friend told the media. But I think Mia's death shattered that myth of invincibility for us. It showed us that these things happen to all types of women. Others describe her as a kind of feminist martyr, stating that she became this icon of feminism and all kinds of things, like she was a riot girl before riot girls were even a thing. Grunge trio Nirvana was so affected by the incident that they helped raise $70,000 to fund a private investigation that would span the next 3 years. When the funds dried up, most expected the head PI, Lee Heron, to simply give up the ghost. But she too had become so attached to Mia's story that she continued to investigate free of charge. Yet in 1998, after 5 years of intensive police and private investigation, one police detective was quoted as saying, "We're no closer to solving the case than we were right after the murder." Mia's fans and loved ones would have to wait 20 years for a solid break in the case, and that break came in 2003, when Florida fisherman Jesus Mesquia was arrested and charged based on corroborating DNA evidence. Mesquia had a history of violence towards women, including incidents of domestic abuse, burglary, assault, and battery. All of his ex-girlfriends, including his wife at the time of his arrest, had filed reports against him. There was also a report of indecent exposure on file against him in Seattle within 2 weeks of Mia Zapata's murder. The only problem homicide detectives faced was that there was no known prior link between Mesquia and Mia. Yet unlike the decades before, detectives had a relatively new tool at their disposal: DNA evidence. A DNA profile was extracted using traces of saliva found in the bite marks of Mia's body. This biological profile was then kept in cold storage until the proper technology was developed for full extraction and analysis. The original 2001 entry failed to generate a positive result, but Mesquia's DNA was entered into the National CODIS database after he was arrested in Florida on burglary and domestic abuse charges in 2002. At his trial, Mesquia maintained his innocence, stating he was nowhere near Seattle in the evening in question. But DNA evidence was irrefutable, and it was argued that there was only a 1 in 100 million chance that Mia's attacker had an identical DNA profile to Jesus Mesquia. The prosecution argued that the attack was one of pure opportunity, that Jesus had spotted Mia leaving the bar, visibly intoxicated, and had decided on a spur-of-the-moment attack. Since Mia was wearing a pair of headphones, she was completely unaware that she was being crept up on until it was too late, and it's likely that she was in the back of Mesquia's vehicle before she even knew what was happening. After assaulting and murdering her, Jesus simply dumped Mia's body at the side of the road, then proceeded to flee the area. On the back of the prosecution's DNA evidence and the defendant's extensive criminal history, Jesus Mesquia was found guilty of Mia's murder in 2004 and was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. He would eventually pass away in a Washington State hospital on January 21st of 2021 at the age of 66 years old. Mia, on the other hand, is interred at the Cave Hill Cemetery in her adopted hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. and he grave is he grave, and Mia, on the other hand, is interred at the Cave Hill Cemetery in her adopted hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, and her grave is still frequented by fans of the Gits, as well as those touched by her wider legacy. In the aftermath of Mia's murder, friends and fans founded a self-defense group they called Home Alive. Home Alive was a female-focused charity that offered a range of courses from basic urban safety to the use of pepper spray and the application of martial arts. The idea being to teach women and girls how to not only defend themselves, but avoid dangerous situations in the first place. Home Alive raised funds through benefit concerts, as well as through the financial contributions of a wide variety of musical acts including Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Heart. And all those that passed through the program were reminded of Mia, and how her death would inspire others to defend their lives and freedoms from those who'd wish to take them away. But there is one person we should remember regarding Mia's case, and that's Lee Heron, the private investigator who continued to work her case long after the funding had run out. It was Lee who pushed for DNA evidence to be collected and stored, and it was Lee who insisted on retesting the DNA after the initial failure to match. Essentially, if it wasn't for the empathy and generosity of one plucky private investigator, Mia Zapata's killer might well have gone unpunished. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, don't forget to grab your sleeping jeans.